And good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 69. As always, I'm going to start us off with a tune.
Oh, we take him from the city or the plough, and we drill him and we dress him out so neat. We teach him to uphold his manly brow, and how to walk and where to put his feet. It doesn't matter who he was before, or what his parents fancied for his name. Once his pocket has a shilling and a uniform he's filling, we call him Tommy Atkins all the same. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and hard hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you. Any time of war, it's Tommy to the front, and we shipped him out in troopers to the scene. You sit at home while Tommy bears the brunt for fighting for his country and his king. And whether he's on India's sorrow strand or pouring out his blood in the Sudan, just to keep our flag a-flying, he's a-doing and a-dying, every inch of him a soldier and a man. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and heart and hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you. Oh, Tommy Atkins, got a good and heart and hand, got a credit for your calling and to all your native land. May your luck be never failing, may your gal be ever true. God bless you, Tommy Atkins, here's your country's love to you.
Okay, that was Tommy Atkins, which is obviously a song about the traditional name for a British soldier. And that's from the channel Patriotic Archive, which I recommend people go and check out, and I often use music from. How are you going, John?
Good evening. I'm doing well.
Excellent.
Doing well.
Did you have any particular subject that you wanted to bring up as the first talking point?
Yes, although it's not strictly related to. It's not strictly related exactly to the talking point. So we talked in the backstage about the MP's day, a Mr. Parish, who has been essentially forced to resign because he got up to some improper behaviour while on the job. So according to him, what happened is that whilst in the House of Commons, he was looking at something to do with tractors on his phone, which is not given his or what were his various responsibilities. That's not unsurprising. And apparently he ended up on a website that I think the name of which was spelt something similarly to tractors. I'd love to know what it was. Well, maybe not. And this website contains certain explicit material, and I imagine he did what most people would do if they found themselves in such a situation, which was to close it very quickly and try and get on with his business. But apparently, later in the day, whilst in a division in the lobby, he found himself tempted to look again at this tractor website. And, yes, it sounds like he was caught both times having a look on some explicit material. And
how was he caught exactly?
It looks like he was just overseen by a couple of other MPs.
And they reported him.
Well, yes.
How strange. Okay,
but the reason I find this interesting is not because he's done something that perhaps is inappropriate for the workplace, and I don't disagree with that. And I think, had it been an accident, had it been as he had first described, where he's browsing quite innocently, and something popped up, and he quickly turns it off and puts it in his pocket, then he should be allowed to explain that, and that shouldn't cost him his job. But given that it sounds like it was intentional, at least the second time, I think it's probably appropriate for him to say, you know what, I made a mistake, I got caught, fair cop, we're done. But the reason I bring this up is because I don't know, Iron Duke, if you can remember another MP recently who was on the job and doing something pretty inappropriate, something I'd probably argue was worse than just watching pornography. Not that I'm in favour of that. But do you remember a Mr. Matt Hancock and what happened with him?
Oh, yeah, with the security cameras filming him snogging away with his girl who was working with him, who was married.
Yes. So Matt Hancock got caught committing adultery on the job. And, aside from the fact he's lost his cabinet position, he's still an MP.
Yeah, it's very strange, isn't it? Look, I think there's two aspects to this. First of all, who on earth goes around reporting I saw so-and-so looking at something naughty on his phone? It's just craziness and not very manly, if I might say so.
Well, I think the reason that would be is because it wasn't a man that reported it. I think that would be it was a lady MP.
Right. Possibly a feminist of some description.
I couldn't comment. I do.
Yes, but given if you become a lady MP, chances are you are some description of feminist. Wouldn't surprise me. Because frankly, I think it's good that MPs are looking at porn when they should be working. No, I don't. But is it the worst crime ever? Probably not.
I think it's interesting that everyone's suddenly got quite puritanical about it, and I think we'd be very naive. Again, I'm not a big fan of the porn industry or anything like that, but I think we'd be naive to think that there wasn't millions of people that managed to go about their daily lives while having some involvement with it.
Yeah,
it's for better or worse, it's fairly normal.
Well, look, as you said,
or ubiquitous at least.
I'd certainly agree with what you said, that Matt Hancock committing adultery with a married woman is certainly worse.
Yeah, so, not only did he ruin his own marriage, he ruined 2 marriages.
Yeah,
with all the children involved in both marriages and so on.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Yet he's still an MP. I just, to me, in terms of orders of magnitude, one is far worse. And let's remember, okay, Matt Hancock didn't do that in the House of Commons itself, but they were both on, were on the clock, so to speak. They weren't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. This wasn't done in their spare time for either.
Yeah, she had a fat government contract, and of course he was a minister. Yes. So yeah.
What's interesting is that there are currently, I believe, 56 MPs being investigated for sexual misconduct. That's almost that's almost 10% of all MPs.
Yeah. Again, I might myself be attracted to the position that there's an awful lot of feminists in the House of Commons. To be honest, I mean, I doubt I'm no great fan of political types, as you know, but I doubt if they're really all that much worse than most other people in that regard.
Well, I think, and I wrote this in the Wellington Project newsletter that went out today. I think we do have a problem with our House of Commons at the moment. I think there are a lot of people in there who don't really understand the levels of standards that the public expect of them in their professional role as public representatives. And I think, don't get me wrong, even people like Wellington is well known for his affairs, alleged or otherwise. Yes. But as far as I understand it, he went about those in his own time.
Yes.
Not while he was working. Absolutely true. And this is there was a parliamentary select committee in relation to it was in relation to basically all the kind of backhanders that MPs are getting, and Ian Hislop was on it. Was involved, and he was being quizzed by various parliamentarians. I think maybe Chris Bryant was there, if I'm remembering names correctly. And he was basically making a fool out of them. They have no idea. Some of these people are legal professionals, accounting professionals, all sorts of all sorts of licensed careers they've had, which would require them to have a high standard of ethics. And they just don't have a clue. It does not cross their mind.
Aren't lawyers the biggest single group amongst MPs?
I believe so.
Former lawyers and barristers and so on.
It apparently just doesn't cross their mind why the general public might think that taking backhanders from companies is a bad thing. They just gave me tickets for a football match. Why do you think they gave you tickets for a football match? Could it be that they're after something?
Yep, very true. Very true.
They just, by ignorance and stupidity or malice, these people are not equipped with the ethical standards that are required of them in the Houses of Parliament by the general public. And I think it's shameful the way they act at the moment.
Well, and again, it's not a job that garners a lot of respect these days, I don't think.
Well, I am very happy to make the distinction between private life and public life, and I'm very happy to accept that MPs are entitled to a private life, and that means they might get up to things that I might find less than appropriate in their private life. But like I say, as long as they're not involved in those on the job, and while they're on the job, they're proper and respectful and ethical and so on, then I'm willing to give them a bit of a pass. But it baffles me, the difference in standards between, what happens when someone commits adultery and what happens when someone watches porn, both on the job. And it baffles me how little respect any of them seem to have for the job.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I mean, I just think it's not a job that the public regard with high respect these days. And of course, when MPs behave in the way you've been talking about, you can't really expect them to either. So,
no. Well, I agree with what your chat's saying, that basically mobile shouldn't be in there. They've all got assistants and so on that can field all the kind of stuff that they might need to be on their mobile for. There's no reason for any of them to be on a mobile phone in Parliament, unless it's an emergency.
I suspect though that they get used by the Whip's office and so on quite a lot.
I'm sure they do, but they shouldn't be.
No, I agree with that too.
But I'm sure
I'm guessing that's the reason why they do have mobile phones on them in the house, in the chamber itself.
I don't think there should be any electric equipment whatsoever in the House of Commons. I think no TV cameras, no microphones, no mobile phones. I think doing all this, televising the Commons, all this kind of stuff has actually ruined it, to be honest.
Well, I mean, televising it is always going to like turn it into a show. So
It's just theatre.
yeah.
Hansard should be the only record of what goes on in the House of Commons.
I think I wouldn't be against it being on the radio, particularly, rather than TV. But I don't think there'd be anything wrong if there's a voice recording done of it. And even could be useful, it would enable constituents to keep an eye on what their MPs are up to, which is mostly not very much, so far as I can work out. But
well, passing lots of laws that government really shouldn't be involved in, if you ask me, like outlawing marriage for 16-year-olds, because apparently lots and lots of 16-year-olds are being forced into unwanted marriages by their parents. And I wonder what group of people that might involve that they don't want to actually deal with directly and would rather penalise, for example, the gypsy community who, very much make use of the fact that they can get married at 16, and for them that's
or the Muslim
great
community,
thing.
Indeed, or the Muslim community, indeed.
Well, this is that would be the community that is forcing their children to get married against their will, potentially, allegedly, that the government don't want.
So what they're doing, in fact, is they're penalising Anglo-Celtic indigenous British people who've always been allowed to get married at 16 with their parents' consent.
And by the way, who make very little use of it.
Yeah, I'm sure they don't. But the fact is, they're stopping indigenous Anglo-Celtic people doing something for the sake of an immigrant group.
You end up in this strange position where, for example, you can have sex at 16, you can get pregnant at 16, you can be raising a child at 16, but you cannot be married to the father of that child.
Yeah, and I mean, in Scotland and Wales, you can vote at 16.
Well, yes, but I think in Scotland, they haven't passed this law. So you're correct to say that in Wales this applies. Yes, in Wales this would apply. So, yeah,
I don't know.
You can't get married at 16 in Wales, but you can vote, you can have sex, you can have a child, you can raise a family, but you just can't be married to the father of your children.
The voting age was reduced to 18, as far as I understand it, because 18-year-old young men could be sent to war.
Yes.
That was
part of the reason a lot of men got the franchise in the first place.
Yes, in World War One, it was the last tranche of men.
And this is something that the feminists will never say when they go on about emancipation and all that kind of stuff and women having the vote. What they never say is that most men didn't actually have a vote very few years before that.
Yep, quite true. I mean, yeah, you're entirely correct. It was World War One, and the fact that the last tranche of unskilled working men, particularly agricultural labourers and people like that, got the vote because they'd been in the trenches. Simple as that.
Yeah, got the vote because they were being taken off the war.
Yeah, and losing limbs and getting killed. So fair enough. That, of course, did not apply to any women. Hanneman, how you going, mate?
Yeah, good, you?
Yeah, not bad. Did you have anything you wanted to bring up or anything to add to what we've been talking about there, which is this MP who has resigned after being caught looking at porn in the
Yeah, who was it?
What was his name, John?
His last name was Parrish.
So not anyone particularly important.
No, I think he was just a bog standard MP.
Right. Well,
Neil Parrish.
Right.
Neil Parrish.
I think I have actually heard of him, but yeah.
He's like some agriculture minister.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a bit in. Did you know the old TV show Mad Men?
Yep.
I mean that's quite a while ago now, but there's a bit in that show where one of the characters tells an anecdote about Neville Chamberlain, like conceding everything to Hitler because he was just dying for a smoke. And I was quite disappointed to find out that this wasn't true, because at the time, even going back to like the 1920s and even earlier, smoking in the Houses of Parliament was strictly banned. So most MPs were used to going, long periods of time without a smoke. And I just find it kind of weird that a place like that, even back then, like after World War II, after World War One, especially, when smoking became quite a big deal.
Yeah.
It was banned in the Houses of Parliament, but mobile phones have been allowed from day one.
Well, I was saying just before you came on, Adam, and I suspect the reason they have mobile phones in the House of Commons is because the whips probably use them.
Yeah.
For SMS messages and so on. But yeah, I mean, I think everybody knows that most MPs are just lobby fodder, basically voting as they're told to. Not too many of them actually use their conscience as they're supposed to, to not vote for some things and vote in favour of others.
Yeah.
I don't know. This particular case, the guy apparently said he was looking at a tractor's website and somehow found himself on a porn site. How that happens, I have no idea. I mean, tractors. But there again,
Single farm hose 101.
Yeah. I don't actually know how you get from tractors to porn, but maybe there is a way, possible. But I mean, as John was saying, this dude's actually resigned as an MP because apparently he was reported by female MPs.
Right.
But you had the minister not so long ago who was having an adulterous affair with a married woman, and he didn't resign as an MP at all. So, and that seems to me slightly worse than looking at a porn site. But there we go.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's always the sex scandals that they hit the Tories with.
Yeah. It usually is. Yeah.
Financial scandals that they hit Labour with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if if Tory MPs are just. I mean, it could well be. I mean, of course, the reason why they hit them with those headlines is because they're kind of trying to undermine the sort of the apparent social conservative ideals that those MPs stand for. But of course, so few conservative MPs actually have any socially conservative standing anyway, or positions anyway. It kind of, it's kind of just rubbish, to be honest. But yeah, on what Hound of Ulster said, in the ruins of Coventry Cathedral, they did the Ramadan feast, and Lidl supplied the food for free.
Lovely. Absolutely lovely. Nothing like the Church of England. Nothing like it at all. Jesus, I don't know.
Yeah, that's Lidl for you, though.
Yeah. Also, John was briefly talking about this law that they brought in to ban 16-year-olds from being able to get married with their parents' consent, not because it's being abused by actual British people, but because it's being abused by Muslims. So,
yeah. I mean, I've seen this before when you talk to people about like marriage practices in some of these these South Asian communities or Central South Asian communities, and they will often say, well, it's our fault because we enable it by having the age of marriage as 16, which is obviously just a massive excuse. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, of course we don't enable it. It wouldn't matter whether we enabled it anyway. They're quite willing to traffic 11-year-olds around gangs of their.
I was just going to say
males.
exactly that, John. Yeah, I mean, in their own nations, these people allow girls to get married at 11 and 12, for God's sake, It's crazy in that regard. Did you have a first subject for this evening, Armin, at all?
No, I've been out for work drinks, so.
No worries, man. No worries. Nothing wrong with that. What I was going to discuss, I don't know if you saw it in the Discord, Adam. There was a video that Lady of Shalott put up, and it's this chap. Hang on, I'm trying to remember his name now.
Not the history debunked guy.
Yes, that one. Yes.
Simon something, isn't it?
Yeah, Simon something. And he put up a video which is, it basically says why patriotic alternative is destined to fade into oblivion. Now, I didn't particularly want to talk about PA because we've spoken about PA quite a few times on this stream. But his central thesis was that British voters won't vote for anyone except the Conservatives or Labour, which I actually don't think is necessarily true, really. But there we go.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
His central thesis was that most British voters won't vote for anyone except the Conservatives or Labour. And I'm not sure I think that's true. I mean, when he said that they won't vote for communists or fascists, I think he's probably right there. And I think that's one of the problems with PA is they've got people associated with them who are somewhat Nazi LARPing. But I don't think that British voters will only vote Conservative or Labour. I don't think that's true, actually.
So I guess we talked about this again a bit before the stream, and I think the fundamental supposition is entirely flawed, because PA can never be voted for at the moment.
Yeah, they're not a political party. They're not registered.
because they're not allowed, not able, can't be registered as a political party, which is in my view, there's a question mark over that in and of itself as to whether whether that's appropriate in a supposedly quote unquote free democracy. I personally feel that no matter how I don't like communists, but if we accept the premise that we're in a liberal democracy, then why shouldn't the communists have a communist party if they want to have representation?
Well, I mean, they do. There is a...
Well, exactly. They do. So why shouldn't PA?
No, look, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that PA shouldn't be allowed to get registered.
No, I'm not saying that you aren't. But
I just don't think that people will vote for them in any large numbers. But that's just me.
But then, as to whether the British public will only ever vote Labour or Conservative, I mean, over what period of time? 100 years ago, the Labour Party didn't exist, and it was the Whigs and the Tories, and slightly more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, I was going to say there was the Liberals and the Conservatives in the 19th century.
Yes, well, those were the Whigs and the Tories, right? And what happened was the Labour Party emerged, and that kind of forced the Liberals or the Whigs and the Conservatives to kind of form a single party, which is known as the Conservative Party.
Maybe I think it was a bit more than that. It was like originally some of the Liberals left because they were Empire loyalist Liberals, if you see what I mean.
Well, there's been various schisms over time, but so to say that they, to say that it's Conservatives or Labour or nothing else is historically inaccurate for a start.
Well, I mean, he even says in his own video, he actually said that had Britain had proportional representation at the time in the 1980s, the National Front would have ended up with over 30 MPs. So, they were getting people voting for them.
I'm not a big fan of proportional representation, but I think, again, if you go back further, in our history, we didn't have a party system, and people, as they notionally still are today, were voted on an individual basis. In theory, no one votes Conservative. They vote for a candidate who happens to be a Conservative.
In theory, yes. It's not been the truth for a very long time, but
it's not the truth in as much as people don't recognise it to be the truth. I have no problem, for example, with people voting for a quote unquote Labour candidate if that Labour candidate was a Brexit backing, working class supporting, closed border loving, sort of the earth, kind of person. I don't have a problem with that.
The chances of that kind of person being in the modern Labour Party would be zero, I would say.
No, take someone like Kate Hoey, for example. I think there's plenty of people who could have stomached voting for her over a number of Conservative MPs.
For sure. But she was very, very much an earlier generation of Labour MP.
Possibly. I wouldn't deny that. There's a lot of globalists in both parties. But what I'm trying to say is if people voted for individuals based on what those individuals wanted to do, you might see a very different makeup in Parliament. But people are wedded to this idea that they're voting for a party, which is an entirely American import.
Well, we've talked about this quite a few times, that, you know, one of the things that people who vote Conservative need to do is to start looking at what their actual Conservative MP votes for and not for.
Yes, absolutely.
And because, in my opinion, there's probably only about 50 Conservative MPs who are in any way, shape or form actually Conservative. And those guys, fine, vote for them, but the others, you shouldn't.
You'd probably be, I mean, if you looked at the voting record for a lot of them, you'd probably be surprised. I think as soon as you get out of the kind of the cabinet, you find that a lot of MPs are a bit more based than you perhaps think, but they're also dealing with reality as well. So, you know, they're not hardline, libertarians or hardline, ultra conservatives. They're, there are some things that they tend to lean a bit left on. There are some things they tend to lean a bit right on.
Fair enough.
Gammon Easter on Twitter used to post up a particularly good graph quite often. Sadly, I think we've grown apart, but they used to post up this graph, and it used to show that basically Conservative MPs, especially high-level Conservative MPs, were to the left of even, in some instances, Labour voters, let alone, a majority of the country or Conservative voters. And what you noticed, if you looked at, like, especially the source that came from, they polled at lots of different levels, and they found that the closer you got down to the grassroots, the more actually Conservative they became. So obviously cabinet ministers were the least, and then general MPs were a bit more aligned with the people, with their voters, and then obviously councillors were even more aligned, and campaigners were basically spot on.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. That seems reasonable. Just to let you know, Atom and George is going to join us at some point over the next half an hour or so.
Although, on the talk of Labour versus Tory MPs, I'm going to say something really, really unpopular, just because I want to. Emily Thornberry is not as bad as most people on the right think.
What makes you say that?
One of the things that people will often point to with her is this instance where she posted a picture on her Twitter page of, it was in somewhere in Medway. I forget exactly. Rochester, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was of a van with a St George's flag out the window, and people were basically saying that she was doing this in a mocking fashion. Now the funny thing about this, I mean, I'm not actually saying Emily Thornberry's a good guy, bird, whatever. The funny thing about this is that
you just committed a hate crime, Adam, and how do you feel?
Yeah, Emily Thornberry's going to kick down the door with a net any second now. The funny thing about that was she wasn't being ironic or satirical at all. She genuinely seemed to believe that was quite a cool sort of the earth scene that she was taking a picture of, and it was actually the rest of the Labour Party that jumped in and assumed that she was being satirical and punching down in the same way that they would. And then when it turned out that people kicked off about this, the rest of the Labour establishment sort of threw her under the bus over it.
What a surprise!
So I mean, you do. I mean, I think Richard, friend of the show, Richard, used to bring this up occasionally, that there was like a string of Labour MPs that could be identified through various means that were sort of not sort of globalist aligned, that were sort of very much outside of that framing.
Yeah, I mean, look, I suppose it comes back to what John was just saying, that people should look at the actual MP and their voting record in the House of Commons rather than the party they're voting for. But on the other hand, the vast majority of MPs remain lobby fodder. So,
Well, in addition to that, I would suggest you find, if there's no one who stands in your area that you can stomach to vote for, I suggest you find a way of standing yourself, whether as an independent or through infiltrating various parties.
Well, I mean, look, we've spoken about this many times. There are so many small right of centre populist kind of.
Like I said, it doesn't matter if people vote for individuals.
Yeah,
because you're voting for people who represent your views.
But what do
Yeah.
you think it would do to the Tory party if, let's say,
Don't care.
as a party, if they banned the use of the leader's name or anyone in the upper cabinet and on local canvassing material? So everything on canvassing material was based around that local MP and what they, have done or want to do.
I would question why anyone votes for an MP that they don't know anything about.
Well, I mean, that's kind of the issue, isn't it, across the country?
Yeah.
That's just, I mean,
If I'm not going to lie, if something came through my, let's assume I was a blank slate and I hadn't made up my mind who I was going to vote for, because actually my Conservative MP isn't half bad. But assuming I was new to the area and I didn't know who to vote for, and assuming it was election time and I got a load of leaflets through my door, and the one for the Conservative Party was just, isn't Boris Johnson great? This is everything Boris Johnson's done. I'd be thinking to myself, and maybe I'm fairly unique in that, but I'd be thinking to myself, hang on a minute, I'm not voting for Boris. Who are you? What are you going to
here's
do?
the thing, right? My birth town is Canterbury, right? That's where I grew up. I'm not there now, but that is where I grew up, and my grandparents, well, my grandmother still lives there, and she kind of tells me about what they get through the door. Now, Canterbury, I can't remember what the delineation is. I think it's Canterbury North that my grandmother's a part of. That was a Tory stronghold for a very long time. I can't remember the man's name, but yeah, he was. He killed a motorcyclist in France. That's all I can remember about it by driving on the wrong side of the road. But other than that, he was a very good guy. I remember having to go and see him about something, and he was pretty great. And the last election, which the Tories were in, which he lost, and they lost that stronghold status, and it's been a Labour stronghold since that election. All the canvassing material they sent around, because my grandmother showed me, didn't mention his name anywhere on it. It was all about Theresa May.
Well, no wonder he lost, especially when you're holding up Theresa May.
Yeah. And I don't know. It's just that it's like they suddenly changed their strategy overnight, and then they just failed miserably all in one go.
What kind of cut goes around for canvassing with a campaign leaflet with Theresa May's face on it?
Yeah.
Well, it's probably Conservative Central Office issued, I should imagine.
I'll just thrown them in the bin and printed my own up.
Yeah, well, this is the thing, because they used to have their own little. They had this. There was a local shop that used to rent out a room upstairs. They used to go up there with a big printer and print off their own leaflets.
They've got a constituency office. They'll have local funds. I would have just binned a lot of them and run my own off.
Yeah. I mean, it was a massive misstep by them, but I do wonder how it would change the election landscape if the parties, not centralised, but if the parties took it upon themselves to make everything.
Well, I'd just like to ban the party system.
Yeah.
I honestly,
just
I
have
think
independence
the worst
run.
thing.
That's it.
Well, it's hyperbolic to say it was the worst thing. I think it was a terrible thing to happen in British politics, the advent of the political party. And don't get me wrong, MPs tended to coalesce around certain issues, like when Wellington was in Parliament, you very much had the kind of the people who would coalesce around the liberal issues of the day, the kind of revolutionaries. You would have the people that would coalesce around issues and related to the countryside and to the gentry, and you'd have people that would coalesce around issues related to kind of businessmen and the business class. But you didn't have fixed parties, and so it meant that the layout of Parliament was quite changeable, and I kind of think that lends itself to a much more organic, measured development.
Yeah, I look. I mean, I don't see us going back to the 1830s or 1840s.
No, it's a shame.
No, I absolutely, I don't disagree with that, but I just don't see it as being very likely. And I mean, the party political system in the UK was certainly on the go even in the 1750s. So, you know, it's I don't think it's very realistic. I do think that you're right. People should be looking at their actual MP rather than at the Prime Minister in particular. But again, I don't think that's going to happen for most people, sadly.
I just want to be in a position where the monarch is appointing the PM from among all of the different MPs, and therefore no one can possibly vote for a PM because there is no PM until the monarch appoints them. And then I want that person to have to try and form a government out of all the different groups of people in the Commons and in the Lords.
Wasn't that what Mosley wanted to bring back?
Probably something like
It seemed like a bit of a deviation from a lot of his other sort of different things. But yeah,
Mosley had lots of different ideas.
Yeah.
I don't think people may say different. I don't think he ever had a complete, concrete view of what he would have done if he could.
Well, I mean, he was
rumor has it
socialist.
He was rumor has it he didn't read any political theory books until he'd gone to prison. So, I mean, he was a little bit all over the place. And yeah, he was kind of economically probably a bit too left wing. Although,
Well, I mean, economically wasn't vastly different to what happened in Nazi Germany, which was corporatism.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he did coalesce around a few issues that were reasonably important at the time. The build-up of slum housing being one.
Yeah, but no one was in favour of the build-up of slum housing.
No.
I mean, that's like it's not a win for Mosley because he happened to be one of the many MPs that was in favour.
I mean, and also I think it's worth bearing in mind that when eventually they did something about this after World War II and did the so-called slum clearances, they ended up replacing a lot of those small 2-up, 2-down terraced houses with high-rise flats, which were much worse. So
that came quite a bit later, didn't it? But yeah, I mean, they basically destroyed whole communities doing that. I mean,
I was when I was born, like in the mid '60s. My father had a 2-up, 2-down terrace 19th century house, but it had a small front garden and it had a back garden, and it was considerably nicer than a high-rise flat. You know, so.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is as well, the post-war council houses, the ones built immediately after the war, were ridiculously big. They were enormous.
Yeah, some of those were
you went from like my grandparents who had a very modest-sized little terraced house, actually a very small terraced house, to my mother having a council house that was, just vast, absolutely humongous, like way bigger than even houses being built now.
Well, I suppose they were looking at bigger families. Yeah. Perhaps they were looking at bigger families just post World War II.
Yeah, but like one of the layout things you saw quite often then was you'd get a living room that spanned the length of the house from front to back. Just it's enormous, great big rooms because they had actual regulation on how small the rooms could be, and the minimum sizes were very big.
But now, of course, we've gone the other way, and like even like new built homes for people to buy are tiny in the UK often.
Yeah, and the thing now, I think the biggest impact is the lack of outdoor space on a lot of new houses, or a lot of new builds generally.
I think one of the saddest thing about new builds is the size of the windows.
Yes. Yeah.
Because obviously they're built with energy performance ratings in mind, and so the windows on these new builds are tiny. And of course, go back not too many years ago, and in hospitals and stuff, the directive was always big windows, lots of sunlight. It's good for people.
Yeah. Britain after all is not the brightest country in the world all the time.
living half your life in dingy surroundings with no light, and it's just miserable.
Well, it gets you depressed as well.
In the town that I used to work in, called Ashford in Kent, there is a new build estate in a place I think it's called Trinity Road. People can go up there and look at it on Google Maps. There's whole rows of houses up there where they haven't put any front windows on them. they've
Wow.
got the outline for windows, but they never put any on them, and they haven't bricked them up later. That was literally how they were finished.
I've got some of those near me, yeah. And it's
very
just
bizarre.
so depressing. Like,
I have to say, if that was me and I bought one of those places, I'd have the window space knocked out and a window put in.
Yeah. Yeah, they're small houses anyway as well, and it just to think that like the entire front end of the house just has no, and you know, no light coming in. So
we got a question in the chat. Am I the only one who prefers separate kitchens and living rooms, dining rooms with serving hatches? I'd agree with that.
I don't have a
prefer them,
but I do have separate rooms. Yes.
I've actually got a very. I've got what Alan was talking about. I've got a very long sitting room, which is like also the dining room at the far end. So, but it is the whole length.
They'll get a small living room, but there's no separate dining room. There's nowhere generally to eat anyway.
Yeah, that's not so good.
When I first moved out, the kitchen, the living room, and the dining room were the same room, and it was the size of just my front room in the home I'd grown up in, council home, as it happens. And it was very small.
Well, look,
the new model now is to have your dinner on your lap and watch the TV.
Yeah.
God. Yeah, my father used to sometimes do that. I used to sometimes do that when I was a kid, but not very often. And I haven't watched TV in 5 years probably, certainly 4. But I've got like it could be an 8-seater dining room table in my place, although I've only got 4 seats for it, and only one of them generally gets used, which is for me. But I don't know. I agree with what Portrait Seal said. I think separate rooms are a good idea, really, for the most part, if your place is big enough, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I want to do, my kitchen doesn't have a door, and I want to put a door on it. So, and that's purely because I don't like cooking smells. I really am off-put by cooking smells. Even my own cooking smells I don't like. So at some stage I will put a door on my kitchen. But I think in the UK your problem is, of course, that we're running out of space because of the constant mass immigration. But
well, I mean, if you look at any of these maps that they like to put out that shows the density of housing versus farmland and just land that isn't developed, that they would argue that we're not. But of course, we're not, as long as you accept that you import all your food from somewhere else. I mean,
this was, I think, something you guys brought up on your little stream yesterday. Was that when people talk about like population density, places like Scotland and Outer Hebrides and all those sort of external places mask the population density of like England specifically.
England on its own is the fourth. I think there's something like the 4th most densely populated country on the planet.
Yeah, I know that I looked this up, and England is in places more heavily populated than some parts of India.
I mean, I think India's got a population density of like 450, and England is like 430 something per kilometre. Yeah, it's appalling. It really is. And of course, now we've got the government talking about putting up solar farms, which is going to be terrible for all forms of wildlife, because wildlife can't basically live where there are nothing but fields and fields of solar panels. Yeah.
Actually,
that was something I could have brought up, but we'll talk about it in a bit, I think.
George, how are you going, mate?
I'm doing very well, gents. How are we all?
Yeah, pretty good.
Did you?
Yeah.
Did you have a first subject you wanted to bring up, George?
Did I? Probably not. I normally don't these days, do I? But more. I've been a bit more focused. I mean, it's pretty much crunch time for me at university, so I'm very much less focused on this sort of stuff. But
busy, fair enough.
Yeah. But
So, yeah, no, that's fair enough.
Imagine going
555
to
in the chat.
university.
yeah, I know the chagrin. But
555 in the chat is asking, every POM I ask why they live in Australia mentions because there are less people here. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot less crowded for sure. But I mean, even in Australia, I mean,
Yeah, but
Australia's
I'm allowed
big
to go
deal
out
used to be.
my house now.
Well, yeah, we are now. We are now, even in Victoria. Although Dictator Dan supposedly sacked 2,500 teachers the other day because they weren't triple jabbed. And of course, the teachers who are not triple jabbed tend to be the less lefty ones. So, you know, but then of course, Dictator Dan is a socialist. So
Nice.
I mean, there's a fair amount of.
Did you see what Macron brought in 2 days?
I didn't. No.
2 days
What
after
was
getting
that?
elected. Speaking of COVID,
No. What did he bring in?
the ID, the electronic digital, the digital ID.
Once he was safely back in the Elysee Palace, he brought that in, did he?
Oh yeah, 2 days, boom, in it comes. Yeah.
But you know, the people who voted for him, it's
He
their
didn't
damn
mess
fault.
around.
But it's the people who
No,
voted
they're
for him,
idiots,
it's their
yeah.
damn fault. Yeah, I mean, this happens every time there's an election. I mean, we're in the middle of an election cycle in Australia at the moment, and the same thing will happen. People will vote for idiots. They just do.
I'm gonna level with you. I think he would have won even if he did say that. Like, it's looking like the French just are on a whole level of crazy. So someone said to me the other day that, you know, younger people actually voted for Macron, but the actual numbers that I've seen voted for Le Pen, but the actual numbers I've seen is that, like, basically 2 after the 5 age groups in France voted for Macron, and that includes the younger folk. So, like, I think the French are actually just.
From what I'd seen, it was basically that the older you were, the more likely you were to vote for Macron, and basically, as we all know, the older you are, the more likely you are to vote full stop.
Yeah, that's not the case. So the actual turnout, that was I think that was in an exit poll or something, but in the actual turnout, so 72% of people over 65 voted for Macron, yes, but also 59.2% of people between 18 and 24 did, and in every single group, they majority voted for Macron, but it's just by different smaller margins for the middle age groups.
Okay.
Crazy. But I mean, you know, look at the British, or for that matter, the Australians, and the differences between the major parties are paper thin. They really are paper thin. You know, no major party in Britain is going to do anything about reducing immigration. There's minor differences on tax policy, is what it comes down to in the end.
Yeah. A very interesting thing about the UK that seems to be different from France is that at this point it seems to be that class no longer predicts how you vote here. It almost seems to be entirely your education, i.e., people who are libcucks like me who go to university, versus normal people who don't need to, you know, cite papers for a living. So that's that. I guess that's the main thing I can bring insight onto. It's that Le Pen would seem to be. She never really seemed to stand a chance. Of course, we all saw the actual margins. I don't think the election was rigged. I'm sorry, everyone.
Well, even if it was, you wouldn't know. But yeah.
Well, yeah. It's certainly not as obvious as it was in the
How
United
does their
States.
counting work? Is it the same as the US, where it's all tallied up by computers?
I think some of it is in France.
So some of it's in the United States. Some of it is, but I think in swing states they have to count it by individuals.
I mean, as far as I saw from everything I saw from the US election, it was all just run through a computer.
I think they have to double check with the computer, but
they probably do spot checks.
Yeah, there was a lot of dodginess going on in the US elections, that's for sure.
I just think you can't beat a cross in the box and all being done by hand.
Ideally, I do believe that's true. But I mean, I'll be honest, I'm beginning to have my doubts about all elections these days, about how actually fair and honest they are.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you've ever been involved in our electoral system, and my dad's been like a chief poll clerk and stuff in the past. He's done it basically every year I've ever been alive. From what I've seen and from what he said, like there's very little opportunity to cheat in our system other than the postal voting,
which is growing.
Which is growing, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I would ban that straight away if I could.
Well, I mean, I think you've got to have it for some people, like soldiers and so on serving overseas, but that it should only be for those sorts of people.
I don't see why you can't just have a count of soldiers serving overseas, or have a proxy vote for them.
Yeah, why can't you have? You could just have the army constituency.
Well,
yeah. Why not?
Why not have an MP that specifically just represents the army?
Probably not a bad idea in some respects. You could have an army MP and a navy MP and an RAF MP.
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, why not be a bad idea? Give them more representation in Parliament for sure. But maybe
3 MPs.
Yeah, well, maybe they wouldn't sell all their equipment to Ukraine that way. Or sorry, give away all their equipment.
Yeah, if we were selling, I wouldn't be so bothered.
Yeah, no, we're giving it away, and of course, it's all paid for by British taxpayers, and the replacements will all be paid for by British taxpayers when Ukraine loses, and all that money has been totally wasted.
And I'm sure the replacements will all be bought from America.
Some of it will be. I mean, things like N-Law, for example, I think comes from Sweden, I believe. But yeah, some of it comes from the US. Not much of it is British, that's for sure, because we don't have much industry anymore. Sadly.
Yeah, it's now basically run by a half American company anyway. And by that I mean BAE.
Or BAE is certainly not really a British company. It's a global company.
Yeah, I mean half its shares are owned abroad, so it's not really.
Yeah.
But
It's absolutely true. One subject I wanted to bring up as a first topic this week, because I've been there and I like the place, is the British Virgin Islands, which is a British overseas territory in the Caribbean, where the leader of the British Virgin Islands, because the British Virgin Islands, like all the British overseas territories these days, or most of them, I should say, is internally self-governing, and the Brits basically take care of foreign policy and defence. And the leader of the British Virgin Islands got caught in a sting operation in America smuggling cocaine, apparently. And there is now talk of, because they're supposedly...
Sorry, did you say champagne?
Cocaine.
Oh, I thought you said champagne. I was like, oh, goodness, the horror.
No, cocaine.
Sorry.
Allegedly, of course, allegedly. Sorry, carry on.
I was going to derail us slightly, going back to the MP thing.
Go on.
The Tory party has now pledged that 50% of its MPs will be women, as if women can do no wrong.
Wow, great. That just makes the Conservative Party even less conservative than they ever were before.
It's totally gonna change everything. Like, I remember reading a paper a while ago, which basically contradicted the idea that women don't go to war as much. Which it's like something like if you measure if you like take account of the fact of all the queens versus kings in European history, women are something like 200% more likely to go to war than men.
Wouldn't surprise me. Plenty of wars under Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Victoria, and even Queen Elizabeth II, for that matter.
Well, I mean, to be fair to those ones, I would hardly think of Queen Victoria as a warmonger, considering she was basically a constitutional monarch at best.
Lee, not 15, 15, 50, 50.
50%, yes, 50, half.
Well, I already suspected it was well above 15, so.
I can't believe the Conservative Party doesn't just change their name to the Liberal Party. Really,
it's just the idea that if half of them are women, suddenly everyone will be super well behaved, and like what? So women don't ever do anything wrong. They never get involved in scandals.
How often do we see female school teachers involved with underage boys? Quite frequently, and they don't get badly punished for it either. Usually,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly they don't get punished on the same level as a male teacher doing the same thing with an underage girl would get.
Well, this is the irony in all this, isn't it? Because our legal system stems from our tradition and our history, because it's comes out of the common law, and I'm fairly certain we would all accept in general that women are different than men. They are, generally speaking, the fairer sex. They should be treated slightly differently, perhaps. And of course, all our historic laws reflect that, and yet all our modern way of thinking is equality, 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 but only equality of the things they want.
Yep, absolutely. Every time there's ever been a suggestion that women should be drafted, all of a sudden the feminists are totally against that idea.
Yes,
Strangely, I mean, don't get me wrong. I don't think women belong in the military, but
all the privileges and all of the privileges and none of the downsides. And you'll never find a feminist campaigning for equal deaths in the workplace, or
you don't get feminists saying there's not enough female sewage workers. You never get that coming up.
There was that thing in the United States in which they wanted they've been campaigning for a long time for that equality amendment, and then it was like doing really well in the 1960s or something. And then the Supreme Court basically said, if this happens, you will also have to be part of the draft.
Yes.
And instantly, the entire thing just fucking went on the back burner.
I mean, this was part of the reason that, many women campaigned against women having the vote, because they didn't, they were cognizant and, recognised the fact that, there were reasons that men were given the vote that women don't perhaps want to be involved in.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and things like women not being in the draft, like everyone should implicitly know why that's an awful idea. Can you suppose that instead of 1 million men dying in the First World War for Britain, it was 1 million women.
Well, 500,000 women.
Yeah. I believe the UK figures are something like 750,000 men.
Yes, a country's population is far easier to replace when you have a lot of women and relatively few men than it is if you had a lot of men and relatively few women. Yeah,
can you imagine the complete sociological nightmare that you would have on your hands? Yeah. And everyone should just intuitively know this, but people just don't seem to understand this really basic tenet of human biology.
Wouldn't be such a big deal. It wouldn't be such a big deal today, George, because the women are not having children. Women are not having children these days.
It wouldn't, because you still get even if women aren't reproducing, men generally get more aggressive. There's more violent crime in areas in which there's just more men. Like if there's 120 men to 100 women, or 150 men to 100 women, you can start having a lot of very bad problems very quickly.
You've also, of course, got to point out that most male violence is directed at other men, not women.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's men struggling with each other to get more resources. That's what most crime is. I mean, the main crime that happens against women is, of course, a rape. But even then, it's something like 60-40 as opposed to, if you count prison rape. But it's not. I'm not trying to discount that or anything, but
I'll have to disagree, because in the UK it is only physically possible for a man to rape a woman, because the definition of rape requires penetration with a penis.
Of course. I refuse to. I don't consider the force to penetrate thing rape. I think it's stupid, to be frank. I think it's statutory.
But the rape thing that women go on about, or feminists, I should say, go on about, is vastly exaggerated.
It's not nearly as well. I mean, it is and it isn't, because the behind the bushes thing, of course, is ridiculously uncommon.
Yeah, very rare. Very rare.
But grooming rape is actually the feminists are right about this, and
But the feminists don't want to point out that there are particular groups who do that in much higher proportions than other groups.
The worrying thing with the rape statistics, if you happen to be a person accused of rape any time in the future, rightly or wrongly, is that they believe that currently far too many people are getting away with not facing any punishment for being raped. So basically, a lot of rape cases fall apart because it's often reported late. There's very little evidence. It's often
there's always he said, she said.
Unfortunately,
what they're
that's
saying
just
is, well, that should be where it ends. But what they're saying is that there aren't enough convictions, and so what do they plan to do in order to convict more? Are they just going to disregard some of the criminal standards and therefore convict people that would otherwise not be convicted?
Yeah, that's certainly what the feminists would like.
And that's a disaster because it disregards the legal standard of innocent till proven guilty for a start. Because it's almost assumed that you have committed it just because you've been accused.
You get that situation with Mike Pence in which he refuses to go into any room with another woman alone.
Yeah,
Mike Pence is correct to do that.
And one of the things that gets forgotten is even the accusation of rape can ruin a bloke's career.
Mm-hmm.
Where even if he's not convicted, it can ruin his career.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So it's nowhere near as one-sided as feminists would have you believe, and also the actual incidence of real rape is much less than feminists often claim. I mean, they were coming up with ridiculous figures at universities in America and so on, which have been proven to be utter nonsense, and also including all sorts of cases where a woman will sleep with a guy and then change her mind a week later.
It's that whole mattress girl saga.
Title IX. Yeah, that was part of Title IX. The universities in America are really funny because they have their own courts. It's absolutely bizarre. So I have no idea how that managed to happen, but
I'm fortunate that I'm married and I don't have to worry about this. But
that's not true, John. That's not true. Rape is a thing in marriage now as well.
I would hate to be a single young man trying to find a life partner in today's world.
Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, what it's like now. When I started to worry about that stuff a little bit when I was probably in my 30s, when I was single, of course, and I wouldn't want to be. I wouldn't want to be a young chap these days.
It's not the most straightforward thing in the world.
Duplicate or.
It's not the most straightforward thing in the world, but there are, there are things you can do. I
don't drink, for example, but if I did, I would not. I don't drink and I don't believe in sex before marriage, so the likelihood of this happening to me would have been very low anyway. But assuming those things weren't the case, if I did drink and I was happy to have one night stand and stuff, I would be very wary about having a one night stand while drunk.
Well, I mean, the other thing is, of course, that if a man and a woman are both having a drink and then decide to sleep with each other, and the woman changes her mind the next day, that she's not treated like an adult. She's treated like a child. Oh, well, you had a drink, therefore the bloke must take advantage of you, which is obviously insane.
I don't think that's the case in the UK. I think the UK law is still at the time of the engage, so to speak. But
George, that will have to change if they want to gain more convictions.
Yeah, the thing is that I don't think the government wants more convictions for these things. And I think there's a logical reason why they don't want more convictions. And that's because the prisons are fucking packed and they have no interest in building any more because they make prisons exceedingly uneconomic.
They're building a very big prison at the moment, aren't they?
It's news to me if they are.
And if they are, it might be for a very. I mean, Britain's still got some ancient Victorian places which eventually will have to get shut down, I dare say.
Like, yeah, a lot of prisons that a lot of these prisons that do end up being built normally house something like 600 guys, and
Yeah,
like
they've got plans. This is from June 2020. They've got plans to build 4 new prisons with 10,000 additional places. So,
wow, 10,000. I mean, I think this country is like something like we have an insane amount of people who just get bail, who are basically like, yeah, we don't have a place to put you. So
Yeah.
there are approximately 80,000 people in prison in the UK.
yeah,
So it's quite a lot.
80 to 90.
Well, bear in mind that an additional 10,000. No, it's 78,000 in England and Wales. If you increase the prison places by 10,000, you're adding more than that's about 12%. And that's not an inconsiderable addition.
It's not inconsiderable, but I don't know the exact figures for violent crime per capita in the UK, but I've got to assume it's a bit more than that. I don't have the figures in front of me.
Well, there's also racial policing in the UK these days, so that certain groups get less done for crimes than other groups do.
Yeah.
So,
if you look at the prison, what's interesting, if you look at the prison population since 1990, which should ring alarm bells in people's minds. Since about 1997, 2000, it's just absolutely exploded.
I wonder why. What's happened since the 1990s? A lot of mass verbal immigration.
Can't think.
Yeah. Who can think of that one?
You get there's a lot of pretty insane stats, and I've said forever. I've said since 2 or 3 years ago, since I read the literature, that like the biggest predictor of crime outside of income inequality is ethnic diversity. That's what it is. That those are the 2 big predictors, and like you can control for a whole bunch of things. You can control for the education of the population. You can control for how much welfare there is. It doesn't make a difference. It just doesn't make a dent.
Yeah, I actually had a pretty comedic discussion with some people. they were talking about gun crime going up in America, and I said, well, if you take out like just a handful of urban centers, the gun crime rate in America drops significantly until it would be like a pretty mid-tier Western European country.
Yeah,
just for gun crime alone, and they were saying, but
suicides also lumped in with their gun crime statistics.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like why it's not the only reason, but it's like why it's one of the reasons why farmers are one of the top 3 categories for suicides in the UK, because they own all the shotguns. And you're not coming back from that. There's
no stomach pump for shotgun lead in your face, is there?
No.
It's also true in Australia, by the way. A lot of Australian farmers commit suicide.
Yeah. And they were saying, but that it's because of the urban centres, population density leads to more crime. And I said, well, I may be wrong, but I think when I looked into this before, if you look at somewhere like Russia, for example, it's actually the reverse of what we have here. Like the countryside is actually more.
It's enormous.
It's more dangerous than in the city. And there's some pretty obvious reasons, I suppose, for why that could be, and it just seems to be here where we import all these various ethnic groups with various grudges and all sorts of other shit going on. And this guy was saying to me, he goes, yeah, but the worst place for crime in the UK per capita is in the northeast. And I was like, yeah. He goes, well, there's no immigrants up there. I'm like, Bradford, all these other urban centres up there. Like, where do you think the northeast of England is exactly? Is he getting it mixed up with Cornwall? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But the mental gymnastics was insane.
Oh, people will try and make any excuse to pretend that diversity is a strength rather than the weakness that it obviously really is.
Portrait Seal in chat said a ton of school shootings are also like suicides in school park car parks. Yeah, I think there was a thing where some outlets tried to make out it was hundreds of school shootings a year.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
most of those couldn't be verified. Some of them were like abandoned schools where black people had gone to do drug deals in the car park,
Yeah.
and also people committing suicide in the car park, and security guards, firing off their gun by mistake after dark, and
I certainly remember that in some Democrat states in America, when they were looking at gun crime figures, they were certainly including suicides in those, which of course grossly skewed the figures. Because if you're a bloke and you have a firearm, that's the most number one way you're going to kill yourself. Because whilst more women make suicide attempts in inverted commas, the blokes tend to actually do it.
Yes.
I mean, I think if firearms ownership is increasing suicide rates, that's definitely an issue. But
I don't think it is particularly. I think all it is that if you're a bloke and you have a firearm, that's what you'll use because that will bloody well kill you.
Yeah, but the thing is, I mean, it's better if you have a suicide means from which people can recover, because a lot of people who attempt suicide, can get help and
absolutely. Yeah, I've known people who've killed themselves, and absolutely, totally agree with you. But I think, and maybe George knows about this because I know he likes his statistics. But I'm pretty sure that the majority of blokes who kill themselves actually want to kill themselves at the time, anyway. Whereas a lot of women will do this cry for help story,
Yes.
Well, that's not exactly what it is. It's that women have, because like if you ask any suicidal person at the time, of course they're going to say, "Yeah, I want to do it." It's actually that women have a far higher rate of regret than men.
Yeah.
And that I think that's generally part of the different reasons why the sexes kill themselves. And of course, as we were talking about, women do it as a cry for help. I genuinely think that like men do it as a sheer fact of distress. Either because they're not really good, either because they're not very good at anything and they're not climbing a hierarchy, to use a Petersonian
or because
term,
they've lost everything and don't feel like they can start from the beginning again.
The main prediction of male suicide is actually not poverty; it's being fired. It's not even divorce, surprisingly enough. It's being fired. So and like that's basically you being ejected from a male hierarchy. It's basically you
because you're however it should or should not be, your ability as a male is determined by your ability to provide for others. And if you can't provide for others, whether or not someone wants you to provide for them or not, whether like a divorce, your wife's decided she doesn't want to provide for you, that's fine. As long as you can still provide, you still have a function and you can still perform a use. If you've lost your job, you've lost that ability to provide, and therefore you have no use.
I think
psychologically, as a man, you write yourself off. You're on the scrap heap.
I think it's slightly different from that. I think it's more like men tie their value to being good at stuff.
But a male tends to a job for a man is like generally fairly central to his identity.
Yeah, and I think most men generally tie the idea of I'm good at this. I'm capable of beating most people in this sort of area.
I think it's deeper than that, because what is a job? A job is simply a proxy for hunting a mammoth. If a man's unable to hunt a mammoth, he's useless to his community.
Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily a job. I think a job is a good predictor, of course, because being fired is a good predictor of suicide. But I think it's like I'm even if like your job is like working at Mackie D's or something, like men normally have to have
any
something.
Job. You couldn't bring a mammoth back to the cave, but you bought an elk. You still have a use.
What I was trying to say is that like even if you work a job at Mackie D's, normally what's going on is that the man has let's say he's good at a computer game, or he's good at picking up birds at the bar, and that's what gives him meaning. And like normally what you get is with people who are very depressed, people who kill themselves are normally, who are men, are normally that either A, not very attractive, B, not very good at making money, i.e. intelligent / hardworking, or C, some combination of those two. That's normally what happens. But what was I going to say? I was going to say something else about. I forgot. It's falling out of my head.
Anything to add on this one, Herman?
No.
I mean, as I mentioned earlier, like farmers in Australia tend to kill themselves at a reasonably high rate,
yes.
and that tends to be like banks foreclosing on their farm. And
I was going to say, because
yeah.
farming is a capital intensive business, and a lot of these farmers end up going bust because just the sheer a lot of their getting into the accountancy kind of stuff, a lot of their expenses are fixed and their incomes are very variable, and they end up going bust because they have a bad year and they can't meet all their outgoings.
Yeah.
I actually remembered what I was going to say. There is all these sort of people who say, well, look, America has higher gun crime. Like, the sheer dishonesty in that statement. Wait, you're telling me a country which has like 100 times the firearms of any given European country has more gun crime as proportion? You should be comparing homicide rates, you absolute fucking cretin.
Yeah, it's nonsense for sure.
At which point, the American crime is still high. It's very outsized in comparison to Europe. But there are other factors you need to consider apart from guns. And like at that point, once you consider things like inequality and ethnic
Basketball
fractionalization.
Americans.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, Adam. Yep.
I prefer the term ethnic fractionalization. It makes me sound a little less sus. Once you account for that, it all completely goes away. In fact, America underpredicts crime after you account for those two things. So,
well, I mean, if you look at a society where civilians are armed, it's going to put some people off doing crimes, isn't it? Because they might get shot.
Well, actually, this is something that Thomas Sowell brings up somewhere. He points out, and I double checked this, and I was quite shocked to find out that it was true.
But that's because Thomas Sowell's a coconut.
The point he brought up was that the burglary rates in the UK are double that of the USA.
Yeah, because there's no consequence, and worse, if you trip over while you're in the middle of burgling someone and you break your leg or something, you'd probably sue the homeowner.
Yeah, I read that story in which a burglar like tripped over someone to blow up a swimming pool, and the judge said that the person who made the blow up swimming pool was accountable and had to pay a fine.
Oh my god!
If you don't laugh, you cry.
Jesus Christ. And in any case, he was probably like given a bloody what do they call it, a fine and a suspended sentence.
Yeah, I mean the thing that the American lefties try to say is they say that guns make homicide easier, and that therefore it's reflected in the homicide rate being higher. I can't remember exactly the argument Peter Hitchens makes in Abolition of Liberty, but he makes quite a good argument about looking at gun crime out of Australia before and after the various regulations coming out of the Port Arthur shooting. Yeah, and he basically kind of shows the idea that gun crime has gone down in Australia is basically being completely bogus. It was going down anyway. In fact, there were things to say that actually the buyback scheme actually slowed down the rate of decline amongst the rate of decline of gun crime.
Well, I mean, as always, criminals don't tend to use legal guns anyway. They never have for strange reasons, But also in Australia, for example, what they did in Australia was they banned semi-automatic rifles. They didn't ban anything else. I mean, like if I wanted to pissball about to do it, I could certainly get a license for a 303 bolt action rifle. That's perfectly anyone can get one of those in Australia, pretty much, providing you haven't got a criminal record. It wouldn't apply in Australia anyway, really, because you can kill yourself just as easily with a 303 as a semi-auto, you know.
Yeah, I mean, one of these arguments that I had with this comedic argument I was having, one of the arguments that they brought up with me previously a while ago was that all the illegal guns on the streets in the UK, when I was bringing up about it, were legal firearms that had been stolen from people's houses, and which I just kind of said, "You're right," but most of the illegal firearms used are all handguns.
Yeah.
And you know, the amount of shotguns used illegally in circulation, they'd have to burgle every legal owner 3 times over for that amount of supply.
Atman, you can't legally own a handgun in the UK, can you?
No, you can't.
No.
I think only in Northern Ireland, and I think some of the English Channel Islands.
I mean,
as a civilian, of course. You mean the military and police use it.
But as a civilian in the UK, you can basically only own a rifle or a shotgun. Yeah.
And on most licenses these days for owning rifles, you have to keep them. You have to keep them at the gun range. You can get some laws which will allow you to keep them at home. But
even then, you have to have a secure steel gun safe.
And like, I mean, I'm kind of okay with the idea that, like, you know, the police, like, if you want to own a gun, the police basically say, okay, look, do you have a safe place to store it? What is your mental health state? Like, I'm okay actually with those sort of background checks, and just you know, I'm not very comfortable with the American sort of a la carte. I can walk. In some places you can walk in, and you know, it's like, okay, we just need to do.
I think people like Stephen Crowder have disproved that so many times.
Yeah, there's mostly a waiting period and all sorts of stuff, even in the most liberal states in terms of gun law, like.
You cannot just go into a gun shop and put your money on the table and walk out with a gun. It doesn't.
No. It's not that. It's more sort of right. There's a waiting period, but there may not be a background check and things like that. It depends. It does depend on the state. Like, I think, and like in some states it is understandable. Like South Dakota, like there's no one for miles sometimes, and you've got a ranch, and it needs defending from something, or you need to shoot some wildlife that are pesting on your crops. Fine, but
I do think that gun ownership in the UK would be a disaster now. Much as I'm kind of libertarian on the issue, I think if you look at the population density of the UK, you are talking like some of these big American cities, and
I think the only difference, the only change I'd probably make would be to reform self-defense laws generally, and then in there I would probably have some allowance for people to use currently existing legally owned firearms in a self-defense situation within proportional.
Yes, of course.
Totally agree, Armin. Totally agree with you there.
If you want a gun license in the UK, you cannot cite self-defense. They will not give you one.
Yeah, I mean,
but currently the problem is now is if you have a shotgun, let's say for other means, and you use it for self-defense in your own home, without even firing it, even if it's empty, you could face 9 years in prison.
It's ridiculous, utterly ridiculous.
I mean, the main thing for me is things like concealed carry. Like, there's something to me about the fact that in the United States, in certain states, I can literally have I can handshake someone, I can sit down with them, talk about it, do some business, and it turned out the entire time they had a gun in their pocket.
What's wrong?
I don't know how I feel about that.
What's wrong with that? I did that in South Africa.
Okay.
I carried a pistol with me everywhere in South Africa. I had a rifle at home and I carried a pistol with me everywhere. When I was on my motorbike, when I went shopping, I hardly ever went out without it.
I don't know.
I didn't shoot anyone.
I did.
Carry.
I mean, the rule is if you are somebody who carries a gun normally, like, you don't bring it out unless you intend to use it.
I mean, yeah, I mean, open carry, sort of like, if it's like in a holster or something like that, I can see it. Fine, I don't care.
No. Mine was in a holster on the back of my belt. You couldn't see it. I mean, why would I want someone to see I was carrying a gun? For one thing, you might get someone trying to steal it.
Yep.
I don't know. There's just.
I did sometimes play with the idea of, could you, as let's say an incoming politician, just turn around and say, we got to clean up these streets, concealed carry permits for any former police officers or army vets.
Yeah.
I'd be okay with
all
that.
those stuff.
I guess I'd be okay with that.
I think, Joz, who some of you may know, he did a great article on the Wellington Project, which kind of went through the history of like private ownership of arms in the UK. If you go by that, I don't believe there should be a reason why people shouldn't be armed. Like, you should expect people to be armed because people should be expected to defend themselves and deal with criminals. Like, I don't have a problem with concealed carry. I think it's, if you look at our history, it's weird that people aren't armed.
It's one of the funny things I always found was because this is another argument you run into a lot. People will say, I'm not usually a big gun person either way. I don't really usually care, but people will often tell you that we never really had a gun culture. Now, one of the things that kind of surprised me is, I think it's in Casino Royale, the James Bond book, in the introduction, I believe, of the one of the modern editions. They talk about a frequent conversation that Ian Fleming had with the guns columnist for the Times newspaper. And indeed, I used to have a bit of a collection of photographs of just like from back in the day, black and white, of people walking to and from like gun ranges in London, and they'd just be carrying rifles out in the open.
Yeah.
I mean, I for one can definitely tell you that, at least with the people I'm aware of, the idea that it's not a gun culture, it's complete bullshit. I was on the shooting team at school. And because I'm a posh prick, I went to shoot birds every now and then. You can bet your bottom dollar. You can bet your bottom dollar. Everyone's like, oh yes, well this is my 20 smoothbore. Oh look at the engravings. Oh yes. It's very, very big, particularly in the parts where I'm from. Where
you still do deer stalking up there, don't you?
In certain parts, it's a bit north. It's a bit further north from where I am. Deer stalking, they're actually trying to reduce, which is a terrible idea in my opinion, because deer have actually become a real pest in these past few years, and it's part of why there's actually a big lobby to get wolves back. But
I was going to say that's because you don't have any wolves. There's no predators.
Yeah. I mean, I'd be fine with actually just increasing the amount of deer stalking, but because farmers here could really not do with having wolves about. But yeah, I mean, either way, there is very much still a gun culture, particularly amongst how might we say, the silver spooners.
And farmers generally. I mean, like even when I lived in Berkshire, all the farmers had shotguns.
Yeah, absolutely.
It isn't just silver spoon stuff, though, isn't it? Is it? Because
I was just saying, ordinary smallholders and people have.
I find a lot of this stuff now has become where it used to be quite class delineated. It's now quite geography delineated. So, like, I actually grew up in a caravan, not a pikey, by the way, and later in a council house. And yet, but I learnt to ride a horse, and my mother went fox hunting. I mean, that was largely because we were just in a community that had a few council houses on the periphery of it, but was a community that was very much in the country and had lots of horse riding and horse riding estates and stuff like that. And you kind of end up drifting into those circles just by a matter of geography anyway. Whereas before, Enoch Powell would wear, his foxhound hunting uniform on the train out of London, which is something you'd never see now ever.
No. absolutely not.
But
You'd probably
I
get
mean,
lynched, to be honest.
you talk about Enoch Powell. That's an interesting one because he wasn't particularly upper
No, he was
class.
not by birth. No,
Not by the
No.
standards of the time, anyway. And he didn't own his own horse, anything like that. He always used to borrow or rent. So he transcended that kind of class barrier, like you say. It wasn't strictly about class. It was more kind of country. Whether you were rich, poor, middle class, whatever, it was.
I think that was Adamant's point. It's
Yeah,
geographical.
I was reinforcing that.
But yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I mean, same thing in Australia. I mean, Australia, there is an upper middle class in Australia, particularly in cities like Sydney and Melbourne, I suppose. But in the countryside, gun ownership in terms of things like shotguns and bolt action rifles is extremely common. Like really, really common.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes a lot of sense when the police are 20 minutes away.
Yeah, and it's not only that. I mean, people use them if for shooting what farmers regard as pests and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
so
there's a utility to them.
Much the same as in the UK, of course. But I do think that anyone who thinks there was no gun culture in Britain, all you got to do is read Sherlock Holmes books, for example. How many times does Sherlock Holmes or Dr. Watson go out with their revolver? It was very common.
In the article, I think Ataman's kindly put in the chat for me. Jos goes into it there. But,
I'll let you guys plug that stuff at the end of the stream, by the way.
Sure. There was the police when they were initially set up. They weren't armed at all, and I mean, the standard Bobby, quote unquote, on the beat today isn't armed. They would ask the public for their guns. There's a criminal. Can you bring your gun?
Yeah, which is weird because now they will say to you, "Oh, it's if we were an armed society, we'd have to have an armed police force."
Which is bullshit, because
we're going to have an armed police force soon anyway. And actually, in the past, it was the complete reverse.
Yes.
I think you will find certainly in all the cities in Britain these days, there are cops with guns in their cars in every area of cities. So an armed cop is never very far away, and that's beside the guys you see walking around with MP5s and stuff.
Yeah.
To say the British police force is unarmed today is actually not strictly speaking true.
How could they not be?
Well, yeah, but I mean, if they're useless even with those guns. So, I mean,
Well, of course, part of the problem is that the police force, and we have to be really clear, the police force as it was, the Metropolitan Police Force that was kind of the template, was hated at the time, absolutely despised.
Yeah, because they'd never been a police force in the UK.
No, we didn't have that. But anyway, the standards for a police officer. I mean, I know through my church people that were police officers sort of back in the 50s and stuff, and you had to be really tall. You had to be a proper bloke. You couldn't be a weedy little 5-foot girl in the police.
Most of the cops, when I was a kid in the 1970s, most of the Metropolitan policemen were still like at least 5'10", and they were mostly ex-soldiers and all this kind of stuff. Vast majority of them, not university graduates at all.
Well, it was a police force, and this is a distinction that Pete Hitchens makes in the Abolition of Liberty, which is that we had a police force and now we've got a police service.
Yes, indeed, and it shows in the rising rates of crime, particularly like property crime, which the cops these days often don't even really
turn a blind eye to.
They don't even investigate it. They'll give you a crime number on the telephone unless you're.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, also, of course, we now have this kind of policing in the UK where Black Lives Matter or the watermelon greenies can go and do stuff and get away with it totally.
Yeah, they get kneeled for.
Yeah, the cops will go down on the knee for Black Lives Matter, but then
But-
you'll get a genuine British protest which will get beaten up.
Heaven forbid you go to a COVID protest or lockdown protest and you get cracked over the head. Yeah.
Just double standards. And the same thing in Australia, by the way. I mean, the Australian police have always been armed. Like all Australian cops walk around with guns. But they don't use them that often, to be honest, but they do. They all have them, as well as pepper spray and tasers and all the rest of the stuff that they carry these days. And they did exactly the same thing here. There were Black Lives Matter protests, which the cops didn't do anything about at all, but there was an anti-lockdown protest by a load of union guys because dictator Dan had stopped them working to support their families. And they used armored vehicles. They used anti-terrorist cops against them. They used rubber bullets, tear gas, you name it. So it's just total double
it's quite
standards.
interesting because I was at a lecture recently about the sort of Yugoslavian peace agreement and stuff like that, and they were talking about how they would do everything they could to kind of get round the rules. So where they weren't allowed to have certain like weapons in their armies or whatever, they would just say it was like a police vehicle. They ended up with like the police having is it BTR 60s and all those kind of stuff.
Yep.
Like APCs, all sorts of things.
Basically a wheeled APC, yes.
Yeah, and you'd end up with the police having like high caliber machine guns and all sorts of stuff because they weren't allowed it in the army. And you've got the same thing here. Like, historically, the army was used to enforce the peace. And of course, as the army, as it began to be seen as less appropriate for the army to do that, you end up with the police doing that. And of course, all that happens is the police end up having the same weapons as the army would have had, and you've just traded one uniform for another. You're not really
they're becoming the move in all Western nations is for the cops to become more and more paramilitary.
Yes, but without the same.
They're not given the same training for a start.
Without the same expectation upon them.
Yeah, absolutely correct. I look. As I said, I think the idea that the Brits have got an unarmed police force is actually a bit of a lie these days. But
it's interesting because when you do see like the military at protests and things, they can be spat on, stuff thrown at them, all sorts of stuff, and they'll just stand there and take it. And yet the police just look totally unruly. It's just chaotic. They're smashing people over the head for the smallest of things. They've got no control.
I mean, look, all you've got to do is go on YouTube and look at some of the stuff of Northern Ireland in the 1970s and 1980s, and the stuff that soldiers used to put up with there, like petrol bombs and bricks and God knows what, and being shot at. And were extremely restrained for the most part in their replies. And until only about 3 years ago, you still had elderly former British soldiers being charged with crimes from Northern Ireland when all of the provisional IRA scum were basically let out of jail, including murderers, including proven murderers. They were just freed.
I'm absolutely against having police being armed with anything more than like a whistle and a truncheon. To be honest, I think the problem the police have got is that they aren't part of the community anymore.
No, because they don't. I mean, look, this is the thing that Peter Hitchens always goes on about. What cops used to do was walk a beat.
Yeah,
and they were there to deter crime.
They talk to you about what the kids up the road have been up to, and you tell them that they've been kicking a ball against your house. You'd go around, give them a clip on the ear. And,
exactly right. Yep, I had cops do that to me when I was like 14 or something. They didn't charge you. They didn't take you to the cop shop. They just whacked you. So it stopped you doing what you were doing, which you shouldn't have been doing.
Whacked you, and they took you home to your mum and dad, and your mum and dad whacked you as well.
Yep, absolutely correct. I mean that was a better system. But of course, the cops in those days, they were designed to deter crime. They weren't ambulance chasers like modern cops are.
Well, as you get the managerial and bureaucratic classes that need to justify every penny and get the value for the quote unquote value for money, you end up with a massive class of people that are just there to kind of record all this stuff. And of course, if you've got people there to record it, and you need to demonstrate that, I'm solving crime or I'm recording crime, you just, the deterrent becomes a second. The deterrent becomes unimportant because you're not there to deter anymore. You're there to record crime. And of course,
you've
the
got
more crime you record, the better you're doing.
You've got whole rafts of cops spending their times on computers looking for hate crimes where someone has said something nasty about gay people or LGBTQ people or some bullshit like that.
That no gay or LGBTQ person has ever seen.
Yeah.
In all likelihood, yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes it's just online stuff. I mean, you'll get you in Britain nowadays. You can get a telephone call from the cops for something you posted online. It is ridiculous. They can't catch people who break into old age pensioners' houses, but they can go on and on about shit like that.
Yeah, I mean, back when AA was good, he made a video actually on Sadiq Khan's crime, and in which everyone was like, well, the Conservatives cut the police forces, which is why London has so much crime. And then he analysed it, and it's like, so the Conservatives can cut the budget by 3%. Sadiq changed the budget by 20% towards policing hate crime. It's just crime which shouldn't exist.
Which, of course, is most of that you will find will be white people being attacked by the police because that's what Sadiq Khan's about. Let's shift. We've gone on about this quite a lot, unless anyone's got any final point to add about it.
Nah.
All right. Well, have any of us seen the movie The Northman? Other than me, I've seen.
No, I've heard people think it's quite crazy. But,
well, they're saying people say it's racist, and the reason they say it's racist, I've watched this by the way, and I'd give it 7.5 out of 10, I guess. It's not a bad movie, but it doesn't have any female warriors, and it doesn't have any black or brown people because, amazingly, it's set in Northern Europe in the Dark Ages. So
well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, it's quite a low bar that we set now, isn't it? That what we held up as the film for the right is that it's kind of mostly historically accurate in its depiction of sort of racial demographics.
Yeah, and it doesn't have female warriors either. I'm so happy about that.
I mean, I remember actually a pretty similar complaint about Dunkirk when that came out. And Dunkirk, I'm going to be honest, I found Dunkirk a very boring film.
I didn't like it. The 1956 or something version is much better with John Mills. It's a much better movie.
Don't get me wrong. I think Nolan's a fine director, and I actually quite like Tenet. People don't like me for that because
it's a terrible
reasons. Obvious reasons, perhaps. But I actually quite like the film. But Dunkirk in particular, one, I found it very boring. Two, there was a lot of problems with it. The RAF, Tom Hardy was 200 meters off the ground. It's what the heck are you doing? That shit was all out of date. But they're complaining. It's their complaint was that the people in it, they're all white men. And I was like, well, first of all, that's not true. They had a French colonial company, but,
which was realistic enough. Fair enough. Yeah.
But second of all, it's who do you think fought in the war?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the British Army was all white in those days,
and that's what got me about 1917 as well. It's there were a few battalions of battalions on the Western fronts, but they weren't they weren't the same fucking unit as everyone else.
No, they were in their own battalions. Yes, absolutely correct. And of course, the other thing about 1917 is if you watch it carefully, there's an awful lot of brown people in the trenches who you're not supposed to notice.
I know something I noticed at the start, because it's all in one take. So you actually it just slowly changes. It's like an eclipse, I suppose. It starts off, everything makes sense, and all of a sudden, hey, okay, it's just one. All of a sudden, it's wait a second.
And there's some more. Yeah, it's it. I'm not a big fan of 1917, and what I would say is go and watch the documentary "They Shall Not Grow Old," which is a colorized World War One documentary. And it's
that was
very
done by
good.
Peter Jackson, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
I
was
think it
Peter
was.
Jackson.
Yeah, Peter Jackson, who did the Lord of the Rings movies. Yes, and you'll see there are no black people in the British Army in the First World War. Surprisingly enough, just literally none.
Yeah,
But we were talking about this on John's stream yesterday. Up until even in the mid-50s, there was less than 40,000 black people in the whole UK. Even in the mid-50s, after Windrush and all this bullshit.
Yeah.
555 in the chat mentions Peaky Blinders, which is a show people often talk about that I have never seen. They had a black army colonel, yes, which is ridiculous because that is set in the 1920s, I believe.
Yeah, I have to say, I was really enjoying Peaky Blinders. I mean, it was a tad bit unrealistic and all that, but I was enjoying it just as sort of a crime thriller. And then I think it was season 4, season 5. It was the same season they introduced Mosley, in which they're like, "Oh my goodness, the woman of the thing. You know, she's in this, misogynative relationship. Isn't this the best thing ever?" I was just like, I can't watch this anymore. I know what this is.
Ben Gale in the chat is saying that he liked the first half of 1917, but as the movie went on, it got pretty stupid. Or I like the ending battle though. The thing I would say about 1917 is the whole premise is stupid because what they in fact would have done would have been to get the Royal Flying Corps to drop a message to the colonel of that unit. They wouldn't have sent 2 soldiers through all these empty German trenches. They had special containers with multicolored streamers on them so they couldn't be missed. And they simply would have sent a couple of RFC planes to do that. Even if there was no radio. And in fact, brigades had radios and telephone lines and so on. So the whole premise of the movie was pretty fucking stupid, to be honest with you. But it was all right. It wasn't the worst film I've ever seen, but I didn't like it for quite a few reasons. But but then I don't like most modern films. I mean, I tried to watch 2 recent films over the last few days. I watched The Batman, which had all of the main characters, the good characters, apart from Batman himself, were non-white, and all of the bad characters were all white, of course, and all white men, of course.
Yeah, I think I pointed this out like in Discord. Like, I think some people were kind of justifying this by saying, "Oh well, you would see like a black woman mayor in a town that's in decline like that." But in the film, they depict it as it's like the white men that have presided over the decline, and it's now the black woman that's gonna.
Yeah, and she also looked to be about 21 as well, which I also thought was pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of. I mean, you get this a lot. Like here in the UK, people will say that, Khan's sort of taken London to the dogs, and yeah, to some degree that's true, but it's also largely the case that Khan is a symptom of decline in London as much as he is the cause of it.
I mean, there was a reason why, in spite of like all the disaster he has and crime being risen by all that, he won re-election. And it's not because he's good. You can, and in fact, that was that thing in which someone basically mapped Khan's victory over, diverse areas of London, and like they both look exactly the same.
Yeah.
It's just how it is.
Well, the Cockney is an extinct species now, or basically moved to Essex, etc.
Oh yeah, I remember. I think I was one time in London in which I think I've seen 1 or 2 Cockneys in my entire life. They're just not really there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, look, I lived in Bermondsey for years, which is inner South London, and there were pie and mash shops still, and corner pubs that blokes used to go to because you could still smoke in them, and it was still quite traditional. Yeah, there were some black people, but there weren't that many in Bermondsey. And this is like not that long ago. You're talking about late 1970s, early 1980s, I guess. I made the mistake when I went to my son's graduation thing for the Navy. I made the mistake of going home and having a look around, and there were literally no white people. I think I saw 2 white people in an area I lived in for years. It's just absolute craziness.
It's entirely possible they weren't English either.
Yeah, absolutely it is. I mean, there were a few gentrified bits right down by the Thames where the posh guys wanted to live, because they were overlooking the river and so on, which used to be warehouses where people worked back in the day. So, yeah. I am, Franz, I am not the same guy from Now I Am an Englishman speech, but I do know that video. And it is quite good, actually. And my father certainly did support Enoch Powell. Big Enoch Powell supporter, my father.
I think everyone did, didn't they, back then?
The vast majority of working class white
something
people did, yes.
It's like something like 80%.
Yeah, so ridiculous.
And and the Conservatives didn't take him on as the leader, which is what they should have done. They took on pedophile Ted Heath instead. He took us into the common market as them.
Well, he was the incumbent, didn't he? And he saw Powell as a threat, so...
Yes.
Yeah, he basically sacked him. And Powell ended up being an MP for Northern Ireland in the end, which is still, I believe, one of the last holdouts that's part of Britain, which is still British. Or at least it would be if the Conservatives weren't giving in to the EU over that stupid agreement we had when we left. So I don't know.
Did you see today that the EU have basically announced that a number of the things we were told we were swivel-eyed racists for suggesting they were planning, they have actually been planning? So they're going to get rid of national vetoes. They're going to get rid of.
Oh yeah, I did see that. Yeah.
They're going to get rid of unanimity, and they're going to obviously build this EU army that was never going to happen.
Yeah.
So,
well, look, I think the EU is an entirely evil organisation myself, and the sooner it breaks up, the better. And it will. It will break up.
I don't think it will. I'm not with you on that.
I think it definitely will break up under it, because the Eastern European countries like Hungary and Poland, etc., are going to have to break away from it eventually.
Yeah, when they stop receiving money.
I really doubt that. In fact, it looks like Poland's basically gone full back into the Western arms.
Well, the rumor is that the Poles are going to go into Western Ukraine. I hope they don't, because that could set off World War III. But that is the rumor that's going around at the moment, for sure.
Yeah,
I've had a serving British. I won't state their rank. Suggest to me that he wouldn't be surprised to see Russians operating in Serbia before too much longer.
I
would not be surprised if this goes wider than Ukraine.
Yeah,
could do.
I think Russia wants to do something about Georgia at some point. I mean, they're going to win. That is absolutely obvious now to me. I mean, someone in the chat asked me earlier, have I changed my opinion? No. The Russians still seem to be winning to me. They're not winning quickly, but they're winning. I still think you're going to end up with a rump Ukraine, which will be the western half of it, and it'll probably be landlocked in the end. And all the Western weapons are doing is getting more people killed for no purpose, as far as I'm concerned, including lots of women and children, of course.
That's kind of my view, I think, for the most part.
I don't think it might delay the end. It's not going to change it. If the rumors that I'm hearing about Poland going into Western Ukraine with its own armed forces are true, that could literally start World War III.
Yeah.
I really am against that. I don't know about you, but I don't really want to see millions of women and children vaporized over Ukraine. Really, I don't.
No.
I don't understand anyone who does. And you're still getting the Ministry of Defence funded British forces news, etc. on YouTube doing propaganda for Ukraine. Nothing else.
We've still got, we're in this sort of 20th century American trap of total surrender. And, historically speaking, in the sort of early 20th century, prior to World War I, essentially, the borders of Europe were redrawn I mean, every 5
Yeah.
minutes.
Yeah, fairly frequently, exactly.
You know, a conflict didn't last very long because it wasn't total in nature. But ever since World War One and the American involvement in general, the push has always been to a kind of total capitulation,
Well, I mean,
total embarrassment for the loser.
The Russians have done like quite a few talks with the Ukrainians, and at one stage the Ukrainians were going to make quite a lot of concessions, but then senile Biden and Cuck Johnson got hold of the Ukrainians, and they went back on them all.
Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, if you want to stop, if you go back to when Russia, after the sort of Napoleonic War, where Russia was trying to grab a bit of territory from the Ottoman Empire, you know, and you know the borders changed, and then you know something would happen, and they'd lose the territory, and but if you didn't have this American totality idea, you would be able to cede a bit of territory to Russia, and then you'd work behind the scenes to destabilize the Russian government, and then the Russian government would fall, and you just snatch it back.
Well, I don't think the Russian government's going to fall at the moment. Putin's vastly more popular now than he was before the war started. So, you know, which generally happens. It shouldn't be a surprise to anyone. Wartime leaders always become more popular.
Well, yeah. But also, again, the totalizing nature kind of forces that, because the Russian people see, you know, the various countries of the world coalescing against it for no. I want to be careful what words I use, but essentially for no reason.
I'm enjoying Liz Truss, who is
she's
coming
insane.
out. She's coming out with Britain should not only fight against Russia, we should fight against China too. And like my comment on that was, I'm probably a bit old-fashioned, but I think 17 destroyers and frigates is not very many to take on the Russians and the Chinese. But you know,
she's a danger.
She's a moron,
and she is a classic example of someone who has never served, being cavalier with the lives of people that do.
Yeah. I would not particularly want to see the Royal Navy fighting the Chinese, although of course if that happened, it would be alongside the Americans and the Japanese and the Australians, and we might win, but we would certainly lose guys for sure, and ships. But the idea that we could fight China and Russia at the same time is just insane. It's absolutely insane. And why does Britain care who runs Ukraine? It's not a vital British interest.
I'm not entirely sure we would win.
No, I'm not saying I'm not entirely sure we'd win. I think we might.
Here's why. Because China's army and China's military is geared up for local conflict. It's geared up for fighting in and around China.
Yeah.
Applying force from a long distance is much harder than applying force close to home.
It is, but bear in mind that it's local for Japan. It's relatively local for Australia, and the Americans and the Royal Navy are absolutely designed to force project anywhere, and we could in fact do that, and we did. We did that last year.
Doesn't China have something like 200 or 300 anti-carrier missiles?
First of all, nobody
made to slam into the deck of a United States carrier and put it out of action.
First of all, George, we don't know how many of those missiles China has, and we don't know if they work at all. So,
but we don't even know if our ships have missiles on them.
Yeah, but that's not very good odds to bet on.
I know. Look, bear in mind, a carrier has layered defenses. They have escorts. They have ships, they have airplanes, they have their own defensive missiles, and they also have passive decoy techniques and all this kind of stuff. It's not as simple as people think it is.
Yeah, sure, but those missiles are pretty cheap to make, I imagine, at least comparatively so.
Well, compared to an aircraft carrier, for sure.
And it only takes one to slam into the deck, and you have to go all the way back to base and repair and all that. It's not like a complete logistical nightmare fighting China on that basis.
Well, if those missiles work and actually manage to hit, bit, you'd be right. But I mean, don't forget the first thing that the Western, first of all, war against China would be mostly a naval and air war. It wouldn't be a land war, not if the West has any brain whatsoever. Anyway, so it's going to be it would be mostly a naval and air war. And the first thing the Western nations are going to do is try and take out those Chinese missiles before we send carriers anywhere near China.
Yeah, that sounds like those missiles, presumably, if China's like, not brain dead themselves, are going to be pretty much well inland. And,
No, but you can't make them too far inland because they won't have the range to hit your ships. And obviously, the ships will try and operate outside their range.
Yeah, but so let's say that the Chinese held them I don't know, less, only 100 miles in or something like that, because I think the range of these things is like 10,000 miles. Sending a payload to that, that's going to require getting into quite deep Chinese airspace. And China's air force is not small. I mean, I think it grew at the same pace as the Americas did last.
Yeah, no, they've got a big air force. I don't think it's as well trained or as well equipped as Western air forces are yet, but it will be eventually. And also, when you're looking at these anti-carrier missiles, etc., the Chinese don't seem too confident because they're building loads of aircraft carriers themselves, which you wouldn't be doing if aircraft carriers were useless.
It's not that they're useless, but I think most modern doctrine, I think the UK doctrine isn't carrier versus carrier warfare. I believe that the white paper in 2011 basically said we're going to use these as portable air bases, and
I think
that's what they are.
Yes, but I think I think carriers are moving away from that sort of battle of midway style.
I think.
Yeah, no, they'll use them for taking out targets on land initially, for sure. But then you also use them for taking out enemy ships.
Mm.
Don't forget the carriers themselves, their aircraft have standoff missiles.
I think if China tried to operate anywhere outside of its sphere of influence, we would probably quite handily beat it. I think. Even in the South China Sea at the moment, if it was a case of being the US Navy, the Royal Navy, the Japanese Navy, which is quite a strong, considerable force and pretty well trained from what I understand, and the Royal Australian Navy, between them, and also you might get South Korea, etc., getting involved as well. With those nations combined, I think we could win. I wouldn't say we will, but we could. But Iron Duke, what
if you in 10 years' time, no, we won't. In 10 years, no, we won't. Which is one reason I think it's more liable to happen than not, because everyone knows that.
I guess what you need to consider as well, though, is that China's navy, China doesn't have any real overseas interests, right?
Well, she does increasingly, yeah, but less than the Americans for certain.
If a war kicked off, it would all be in the China Sea, and on that basis, they would be able to maximize the use of their fleet, because their fleet, unlike America, England, etc., doesn't have any other interests overseas. They're not involved anywhere else.
Well, yeah, but let's be clear. One of the things that's happening in America at the moment is the Department of Defense and the Pentagon are the people who are trying to rein in senile Biden and the American State Department, because they know the real enemy is the Chinese Communist Party, not bloody Russia and Ukraine. And the Americans have been trying to refocus on the Pacific for the past more than 5 years. But to be truthful, there's nothing that navies can really do about the situation in Ukraine. They can't even get into the Black Sea. So it's and another thing I would point out is where Britain and America have a big advantage, and also to some degree Japan and Australia, is submarines. The Chinese submarines are not as advanced as the Western ones in any respect. And I think an awful lot of Chinese warships will suddenly go boom from SSN under killer submarines. A lot. Think about the Belgrano and the Falklands War and this kind of stuff. I think that will happen a lot. And they won't be using World War II torpedoes as we were in the Falklands War. They'll be using modern homing torpedoes, which actually break the back of the ship that they hit. They're designed to explode under it, and it breaks the ship's keel, and the ship breaks in half pretty quickly. And I think a lot of the Chinese Navy will just go boom in that sort of a war. And the Chinese must know this, and their own submarines are not good enough to do that to us. Not reliably, anyway. And the conventional submarines that Australia and Japan has are also pretty good and well trained.
I mean,
so that would be an equalizing factor as well.
I guess the other question is that, like, you know, victory against the Chinese, I mean, what does that get Britain, really?
Well, I think it gets all of the West a very good thing, which would be the excuse, at least, for Britain to start building up its armed forces again, and also to build up our own industries, because presumably China will stop making everything for everyone, which would kind of be good.
You can do that anyway, though.
Well, you could, but we won't. But we won't.
Mean, and that offshoring is already happening anyway, because China's actually slowing down its tertiary industry. You know, most of that stuff is now moving to places like Indonesia.
Some of it is, Thailand. Yeah, for sure.
No, yep. Like most of it is, because also it's the other thing is that because the Chinese bureaucracy is really starting to kick in, the tax rates have gone up much more in China. So like there's actually, you know, China is not the China's not going to be the secondary industry locus forever. It's probably going to start moving again. And so, like, you know, I see China as, you know, basically, you know, it's the Middle Kingdom trying to control the Middle Kingdom and you know, the Eastern Pacific and things like that. And it's like, for me, that's like more power to them. You know.
Well, look, if you don't do anything about China, in 10 years, we certainly wouldn't win.
Okay.
China is just going to get more and more powerful. So the West has this kind of like 10-year window to do something about it. And also, if China takes Taiwan, which they definitely want to do, Japan knows damn well they'll be next, which is why the Japanese Prime Minister has said not once, but about 3 times now that Japan will defend Taiwan.
Yeah, sure, but that's
because the Chinese hate and detest the Japanese.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but like, okay, so Japan goes into war with China. I mean, oh damn, Attack on Titan season 4 part 3 isn't coming out. Oh no. Anyway, what shall I do? Like, again,
but my point is, if in a war, a naval and air war, like most of the Chinese Navy and half their Air Force was written off, that's going to set the Chinese back hugely by a long way for a long time.
I don't think you're quite understanding what I mean. I mean, for Britain, none of this means anything, really.
I disagree, because I think China's our enemy. I don't regard. I'm entirely neutral about Russia. I don't think Russia's a threat to Britain at all at the moment, but China certainly is.
Like, I'm not seeing it. I'm just really not seeing it.
Well, there you go. You and I will have to agree to disagree on that one, because I think China's the real enemy, and Ukraine and Russia is a distraction.
Like, I mean, what can they do? So, could they invade us? I mean,
yeah,
we're 20,000 miles away.
Mate, if China, if and when China became the number 1 superpower in the world, which is what's going to happen if nothing is done to stop it, as America declines, and America is visibly declining now. I think you'd agree on that. And they are militarily as well. America militarily is nowhere near as strong today as they were 10 years ago, and that was less strong than they were 10 years before that. Yeah. You know,
proportionally, at the very least,
the Chinese Navy has more warships now than the USN has.
Yeah. Again, I still don't see the issue here.
Well, listen, many of us don't like American hegemony all that much, but it's been quite kind compared to what the Chinese Communist Party hegemony would be like, I suspect.
I mean, some of the worst things seem to be coming regardless.
Yeah, some of them do. Look, I'm not suggesting this is our #1 problem or anything, but if I was going to be preparing the British Armed Forces to do anything, it would be the Navy specifically and the Marines to fight against China. Because I believe that China would certainly, if they get away with taking Taiwan, Japan will be their next target, and after that, probably Australia, which is a very big country with hardly any people in it, relatively speaking. There's about 22, 23 million Australians in a place the size of the continental United States minus Alaska.
Maybe you'll let Putin have Australia.
Yeah.
Alias Jones in the chat says China's force projection is limited at the moment. Yeah, it is at the moment, but it won't be forever. They are already operating task groups in the Gulf. They already have naval bases in Africa. They are expanding.
I mean, they went from 0 to, what was it, 3 or 4 carriers in the period of 10 years?
Well, they're building at the moment about 3 or 4 carriers, and these are as big as the American super carriers, the new ones they're building.
Yeah, it's important to remember as well that China is a nuclear capable country.
Yes, also true.
It's expected to have 1,000 warheads by 2030.
Yep, also true. Also true.
I mean,
and things like their submarines are going to get better eventually.
Yes, and George, you're about to say 1,000 warheads doesn't sound so bad.
No. I'm aware of that 1,000 warheads is bad.
We're not talking Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're talking
I'm fully aware of the
10 times, 100 times.
I'm fully aware of the difference.
Hang on, guys.
Hold on. I need to respond to this. We're fully aware of the difference between a 23 kiloton weapon and a 100 megaton, well, not 150 megaton with SAR bomber. What I'm simply saying is that the United States operates 3,000, the Russians operate 10,000. The amount of nuclear weapons seems to be relatively inconsequential to whether they get used. Just seems to be a very surface level analysis of it. With all due respect.
I just wanted to answer this thing in the chat here. 555, amazing that Brits would sit by and allow Australia to be invaded by China when Australians have always fought for Britain. I don't think that anyone here is saying, and I'm certainly not saying, that Britain would sit by and let Australia be invaded. And I'm not sure anyone on the panel is saying that. I actually don't think Britain would do that. I mean, there's a reason there was a Royal Navy task group in the South China Sea last year.
I'll be quite honest, since the loss of India and the failure to deal with the Suez Canal crisis, Britain's interests and Britain's ability to protect any interests in that direction are dead, frankly. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm a Kanzuk supporter, so I'm not going to agree with that one, John.
Well, I'm talking about the reality. The reality is Britain's ability to project its power that far. In any
it's not true. We had a UK task group in the South China Sea last year. My son was in that task group.
And what is a UK task group going to do against the Chinese Navy?
Well, alongside no, I'm sorry, a full UK carrier task group, which would include probably 6 destroyers and frigates, a nuclear hunter killer submarine, maybe 2, and a carrier, plus supply ships, etc. That alongside our allies, that's a very powerful force
operating in China's backyard.
Very powerful force
with 200, at least 200 carrier missiles pointed.
But they wouldn't be there on their own. There would be US carrier task groups there as well. There would be Royal Australian Navy ships probably supporting the Royal Navy carrier task group. There would be Japanese carriers and ships there as well. Japan now has aircraft carriers, by the way.
But then it's America that's doing that. Britain's just tagging along.
It's like America's +1.
I disagree with you. I totally disagree with you. I don't think that's true at all. I really don't. And also, Britain has recently reopened its naval base in Singapore, and now has a ship base there all the time. We also have treaties with various people in that part of the world, and there's even a British overseas territory in the Indian Ocean, and another one in the Pacific as well.
Right, but having naval bases and overseas territories is pretty useless if we haven't got the naval power to fill that web. and cover that.
Oh, listen,
so.
you are never going to hear me say that the Royal Navy is large enough. But a proper Royal Navy carrier task group with 2 anti-aircraft destroyers and 4 anti-submarine frigates and at least 1 nuclear hunter killer submarine and a Queen Elizabeth class carrier with a full air group on it is a very powerful force. It is not small at all.
We just don't have enough. That's the thing.
No, well, look, listen, we've only got 2 carriers, and Britain should be able to put a full 36 fast jet air group on both of those carriers. Absolutely, totally. I'm not going to argue with that for a second.
So according to this, the CJ100, which has just gone online this year, has an accuracy error of 1 meter.
This is what the Chinese say, George.
Yeah. No, this is from a CIA report.
Yeah.
And it has 3,000 kilometer. It has a 3,000 kilometer range. That sounds pretty fucking nasty to me. It goes at Mach 8.
Yeah. All right. Let me just point out something to you, George. The CIA have a very long history of doing this. They used to do it with Russia when it was the Soviet Union all the time, because it's how you get more defense funding in America.
Yes. Yeah.
So they tend to exaggerate this stuff, to be honest. They will always go worst case scenario, always. But I would point out to you once again, the very first thing the West are going to do if there is a war against China is to try and take those missiles out.
Yeah, but these things
we are not going to wait for. They're not. But it doesn't make any difference. You don't. The Americans have, and so do we, satellites that can actually zoom down and read number plates.
Yeah. So you're gonna what? You're gonna send a strike force right over Liaoning. And the Chinese is going to let that happen. Come on.
I tried to tell you this before. Western aircraft have standoff missiles themselves. You don't send the actual aircraft anywhere near its target. It can fire from hundreds of miles away. And also, don't forget, ships and British submarines also have cruise missiles aboard them, which will also be being fired at these damn things. It's not going to be the case that the Chinese are just going to be able to do what they like.
Okay, and assuming the Chinese land a few, I don't know, 1 million soldiers on Australian soil.
Well, yeah, okay. I doubt
what's Britain going to do about that?
They couldn't. For a start.
They couldn't move anything like that number of troops. You would be looking at 20, 30,000, and that's fightable.
By the Australian Army?
It's fightable for a while by the Australian Army, but the Australians will quickly get reinforced by the Yanks and the Brits, I think.
They'll land at Bonsai Beach and then realise that was a huge tactical error.
No, I think
the Aussies will release the dingoes.
You also the emus. It's
and
the
they
emus.
came bending over.
Yeah. They'll release the emus. No. Look, the Chinese would probably land in northern Australia. And one of the advantages Australia has is a lot of the middle of it is desert or semi-desert, and there's not good communications from the north to the south. So that's another thing that would work against the Chinese. So and as George correctly said, maybe they could land 50,000, and that would be the absolute maximum number of men they could land, and that is viable, especially in a defensive battle. So yeah, America is actually bound to go and defend Australia. This is the reason Australia sends its troops to go and help most American expeditions.
America would be crazy.
It's why Britain does.
America would be crazy not to defend these interests. But the question is, would Britain or should Britain? I mean, Australia.
I think Britain would. I think Britain would. Don't forget, Australia is buying the latest British frigate design. And they're actually going to build more of them than the Royal Navy is, surprisingly enough. There's also the US, British, Australian nuclear submarine deal that's going on at the moment. So Britain and Australia recently signed a pretty important trade deal following Britain getting out of the VAL EU. And as I said, there was a British carrier task group in the South China Sea last year, and it wasn't there for no reason. It was there deliberately to signal the fact that Britain is interested in that part of the world.
Can I ask a question? Assuming there was no carrier group present, how long would it take us to send one?
If there was no warning and you were going, look at Falklands. You looking to get stuff to sea is 2 weeks.
Okay.
10 days. 10 days to actually get it from a standing start. It would take you about 10 days to get
to Australia.
To get the ships at sea, and from there, and then you're looking at steaming at say 25 knots to get to Australia. So probably another couple of weeks.
And that's assuming you're able to go through Suez,
which you would be able to.
What if you weren't?
Well, you would, because you think the Egyptians are going to piss off the Yanks? I don't think so.
Well, let's assume the battle lines are drawn, and it's China and its allies versus the world. Is Britain going to be able to? Is Britain going to be able to?
All right. So if they have to go around Africa, then you can add another 10 days to the voyage. But I mean, the idea that this is
get there in any time to do anything.
Well, no, that's not true at all. But I mean, it's also this wouldn't happen from a standing start. Like you'd have warning that this is going to happen. Yeah, and so you would send these forces before anything had happened.
What I'm trying to say is, Britain's ability on its own to project anything like a meaningful power against China is dead.
No, not true. Not true.
The only way Britain can present any meaningful power against China is part of a larger group.
That's true enough, but that's true of all nations. I mean, even America wouldn't want to fight the Chinese in the South China Sea on their own, I can assure you. Look, you do realise, John, don't you, that America has? I think they've got 11 carriers, 10 or 11.
Yeah, I'm well aware what
but
America
only.
has.
Hang on. Well, all right. Let me finish. America has about 11 carriers, but they only have about 5 actual carrier task groups.
Yes.
And if Britain had enough aircraft to do so, we could have 2. So it's not meaningless, is
But
it?
we don't.
2 compared to 5. Well, we have 1 compared to 5. So it's still not meaningless, is it? And the only other country that has a big carrier, and it's nowhere near as big as the British carriers, is France. And they only have 1, and it spends most of its time in dockyard.
Don't you need 3 to keep 2 at sea at all times?
Yes, if you had 3, you would always have 1 all the time. If you had 3, and
this is
you
why
have
we
2.
operate. This is why we operate 4 Trident submarines, isn't it? You have 2 at sea, 1 in training, 1 in repairs. But actually, we've only got 1 at sea at the moment, basically, at any given time, because they're all in such a sorry state of repair. As far
although what the Royal Navy says anyway is that in the event of an emergency, they would put another 1 to sea immediately, so there'd be 2.
Yeah,
and they probably would, to be fair.
I assume they put the 1 that's in training to sea immediately.
Yeah. So you'd end up with 2 operational. The other way that the Royal Navy is much more powerful than you might think is, although we've only got 7 SSN hunter-killer submarines, they're the best ones in the world. They have the best sonar. They have some of the best torpedoes, and those things could wreak havoc on the Chinese Navy.
Listen, I'm not trying to do Britain down. I think we have some of the best hardware and the best soldiers in the world in terms of training and ability and
well, the British Army's pretty useless really at the moment, but that's a different topic.
Well, it would certainly be pretty useless against China, because the ability to get them that far and fight any land battle and supply
the Royal Marines would be very useful, because you'd have small islands that you'd want to take and this kind of stuff.
You'd use them as to target specific targets, but we're not going to fight a land battle against China. We're not going to take any land against China realistically.
No, the only places that the West would want to take out would be the islands in the South China Sea that China has fortified, but some of those are very small. They're not much bigger than an aircraft carrier.
But what I'm saying is that Britain doesn't. It's not that we've got a load of rubbish. It's that what we have got is relatively reduced in size.
Oh, listen, I'm not arguing that the Royal Navy's big enough. I'm not arguing that at all. All I'm saying is it's not a meaninglessly small force.
Individually, ship for ship, I'm sure we're more than a match for any individual Chinese ship. But I have reservations about trying to operate. And again, what I'm saying is that Britain on its own, which it wouldn't be.
No.
I'm using that as a scenario. Britain on its own, operating in China's backyard, has, I would say, its ability to do anything to protect Australia is fairly limited.
Not alongside allies, including, of course, the Royal Australian Navy.
Isn't this
Okay.
why the Navy's going to come in more into its own? I mean, if you look
Yes,
at Libya,
yes,
I mean, I know
yes.
most people are going to say we shouldn't have been in Libya, and I agree. But if you look at it from a sort
Me
of
too.
a tactical perspective, Libya cost us a lot of money and took a lot more effort because we had to fly planes in from Italian air bases.
Yep, and,
And
we
we're
ended
now
up
looking at-
using a helicopter carrier as a makeshift carrier, flying Apaches from it. Yes.
Yeah, and we're now looking at a world where essentially the West and its friends is shrinking, as people are sort of dividing back up into East versus West again.
So totally agree.
We're
And
gonna need-
multi-power centers. Yes, all true.
We're going to need a navy that can essentially be a launch pad for operations.
I think our Navy is probably half the size it should be.
Yes, absolutely. I would agree. Oh, look, everyone I know, including like serving naval officers like my son, etc., will tell you that the British Royal Navy needs 25 destroyers and frigates, not 17, a minimum of 25. We're not going to get another aircraft carrier, sadly, although the two we've got cost us as much as 3 would have done had the Labour Party not built them so slowly. Also, what I would like to see is eventually when HMS Albion and Bulwark are replaced, which are the amphibious assault ships, I'd like to see them replaced by a couple of ships like the Australian Canberra class ships, which could operate half a dozen or so F-35Bs from their flight deck if you wanted to. So that would actually give Britain 4 flight decks. And that is one way of expanding Britain's naval air power. And of course, they can also operate lots of helicopters and that kind of stuff, and landing craft. So that's the way I'd like to see the Royal Navy go. But I mean, that's going to take time. It's not going to happen. And at the moment, the only thing the Conservative Party are interested in doing is giving away all Britain's weapons to Ukraine.
And watching porn in Parliament.
And watching porn in Parliament, yeah. But yeah, it's a true story. I agree with Craig in the chat. There's too many women in the Navy. Yes, there are. Absolutely no argument against that. I've done whole streams on it with people like Don the Pleb talking about how there are far too many women in the military generally in frontline roles they shouldn't be in, and that includes they shouldn't be on warships. The Royal Navy has a couple of damage simulators, which are extremely expensive things. You know, they move around and you can flood different compartments with freezing seawater and all this kind of stuff. And every time they send women cadets into these things, they all end up crying in the corner useless. So what they'd be like on a real warship where there's blood and body parts lying around, I have no idea, but I don't think it would go well. But Obama Kang's in the chat is saying, as a Brit, what is our Navy for? If we can't defend our closest allies, then what we and our ally, what's the point of it? Yeah, I totally agree. And, you know, the other thing is if Britain is going to be this big global trading power, which the Conservatives keep saying we are going to be, and, you know, we are doing trade deals all around the world, but the only thing that can defend that is the Navy, because 95% plus of world trade still goes by sea and ships. And also, as has been pointed out on this stream already for a different subject, Britain cannot feed itself.
Yeah.
So, you know, Britain is in the same position as we would have been in World War I or World War II, and this again applies to China in the future. If enemy submarines can sink the merchant ships bringing food into Britain, Britain will starve. And the only thing that can defend against that is the Navy.
Food during World War II.
Well, we increased it quite a lot.
No, we actually produced less food during World War II than we did in the interwar period.
Well, that would have been because so many guys were in the forces, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Because I know that they were
80%,
working on farms and stuff like that, didn't they?
I mean, our beef, well, we're not really that great at producing beef. It's not really like something we put a lot of energy into. But even then, 80% of beef consumed in the UK is actually produced in the UK. So
the rest is probably made in Ireland.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of it would come from Ireland. That's true. But I mean, the point is, we are a net importer of food.
Yes, we export a lot of food, but if we didn't export it, we'd still have to import I think it's something between 20 to 30% of everything we eat.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the funny things going on now is because we export a lot of wheat, and funny enough, that is actually the thing that's really rocketed up in price.
Yeah, because
Well,
the two largest exporters, one's
Russia
not
and
planting
Ukraine.
anything, and the other we can't buy from.
Well,
no one in the
well,
Western world.
It's also
also,
the ethanol in fuel though as well, which they've
that's
just increased.
but the main thing actually is that wheat is the least efficient crop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an efficient crop, but it's vital in Western countries because people want bread.
Yeah, wheat is more of a luxury here. But like, you know, Ireland, there's a reason Ireland grew potatoes and not wheat. It's because potatoes are very, very boring, but you know they also feed people and are exceedingly productive crops.
Yep. Yep.
Same for barley and corn. But
did you watch all hype stuff on this, George?
Yeah, Jared Diamond stuff. I mean, I read Jared Diamond a while before that, and
I don't agree with Jared Diamond at all. You were talking about Guns, German Steel, yeah?
Yeah.
I think that book is crap. I really think that book is crap.
Yeah, there is a much better book, and actually it's quite good because it's quite sciencey, and I quite like sciencey books. But there was one that did it far better. People can look it up. It's a guy called Gregory Clark. It's called Farewell to Arms. Does a much better job. But yeah, like a lot of the crops that the West like to eat are just exceedingly inefficient.
Yes, agreed.
Hang on a minute. A lot of wheat doesn't actually get used for food, though. It gets used for fuel and chicken feed.
Yes.
Yeah. I know what I mean by wheat. I mean when I say it's an efficient crop, I mean calories per acre.
I know you're right. Potatoes are much better. I know that. Yeah. I mean, look, I don't know about you guys, but when I was growing up in a working class family, like potatoes were pretty much a standard, you know.
Yeah. But this is the thing, right? We. I mean, first off, because I spoke to the two farmers that I've worked with previously, they're all saying we're actually having a real bumper crop. It's going really well. But one of the things that's kind of come up is that like wheat prices have gone up by sort of almost 70%. You know, it's about like £100, you know, a ton extra.
Well, I'm waiting for the influx of refugees from all those Middle Eastern countries that depended on Russian and Ukrainian wheat that have no reserves at all.
But of course, I mean, large part of the wheat going up in price has also been because we've shifted to E10 petrol, which has 5% more ethanol. And America has also just increased the amount of ethanol in their fuel as well.
Am I right in thinking that E10 is also less? You get less bang for your buck out of it too.
Apparently so. Yeah. That's
wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is, so even though, but the way this is going to hit most people, I think, is it's going to be like things like eggs and chicken breasts, and you know, various poultry on the shelves, because that's what most of the chicken farmers use to help beef up and substitute chicken feed.
Obama Kings, I think, is talking about. I think he's talking about them. I might be wrong, but I think he's talking about who we are and how we got here, which is a David Reich book. And David Reich is he's hilarious because he's a liberal geneticist. I read his book, and he basically has this entire paragraph in which he basically says, "Look, we're gonna in the next 10 years, we're basically gonna find out that different groups of people are actually much more different under the surface than social science will have us believe. And if we don't do something about this, people like me will have a field day."
No, I totally agree with that. I mean, look, all you've got to do, even if you know a little bit about genetics and biology, is look at tigers and how many subspecies of tiger there are. I think it's about 7 or 8.
Yeah.
And tigers are much more similar than humans.
I mean,
I do believe that if humans were not humans, there would be at least 4 or 5 subspecies of humans.
Well, also, you know, a lot of people say that, like, you know, subspeciation, it didn't take long. It was too short a period of time. But you have to remember, there was a study in the Soviet Union, absolutely fascinating, in which they got undomesticated foxes, a whole bunch of undomesticated foxes, and they just selectively bred them for a period of.
I've seen this. Yeah,
I think it was 3 or 4 generations.
Yeah,
and then
I saw
basically, those foxes basically that the elite group basically became similar to the
Dogs.
domesticated dog.
Yep,
You
just
know.
like dogs, wagging their tail, rolling on their back to get their tummies rubbed and all.
And they
Yeah,
snuggle.
I've seen video of it. Yeah.
Yeah, like these things do not take long at all. If you can do that in 6 or 7 generations, most Western countries have had civilization countries have had, they've had people under immense selection for agricultural production, for criminal behavior, things like that, for well over 20, 40, 50 generations. Like, you think that nothing changed in that time? You're crazy.
Also, as I understand evolutionary theory, and I know some people criticize this theory these days, but as I understand it, it's not the modern view of it is not so much that it's a very gradual, slow change. It happens in fits and starts.
Yeah.
So something will suddenly change, not very slowly, like over generation after generation, slightly change. There'll be a sudden jump, and that seems to be more common. And that, as I understand it, is what modern scientists think happens.
Yeah, I mean,
it was Sonny Jim in the chat. Yes, it was foxes. I've actually seen video of it. I mean, they may have done it with wolves as well, but the one George is talking about was foxes.
I mean, so the general theory that I'm talking about comes from a paper by Robert Frost. I don't know. That might be. I get him confused with the poet all the time, so I might have just said the poet's name. But he basically did a thing in which, like, he studied capital punishment in Western Europe, and basically, if you kill the 1% of the most violent people every generation, which is what
more and more peaceful society,
which is what capital punishment does, and it's actually something that the Nigerians are about to do. The Nigerians are basically going to castrate all sex offenders and kill pedophiles and murderers. And like, I'm going to predict that the Nigerians will possibly, within 150 years, if they keep the policy up, will possibly become more peaceful than we are. I think that's an entirely realistic prospect.
I mean, I don't think that's necessarily entirely a good thing, I have to say. Like becoming more peaceful. I think, nations need their warriors.
Sure. I mean, it does make people also, Gregory Clark points this out, it makes people more liberal.
Which is also bad.
Yeah. A lot of bad things happen along with this. I'm going to find the paper now. But
apparently you did say the poet's name, according to Lee Ham in the chat. But yeah, I think Western nations like Britain have, and Australia, have certainly become too pacific these days.
Peter Frost, that's it.
Peter Frost. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I do think Western nations like Britain have become too peaceful now. Even when I was a young chap, you could have a punch up in the bar and that was it. You'd have a punch up in the bar, but you didn't necessarily always get the police call like you do now.
Yeah.
And I think, two adult men should be able to go outside and have a straight up punch up if that's what they need to do occasionally.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I've just been rambling a bit about like my favorite subjects on earth. So I might have lost a few people, but
no, I don't think we have. I don't think we've lost anyone particularly. But yeah, no, look, we've come a long way from what we were talking about. And my main point is that, you need a navy to make sure that this food arrives in Britain so the British population doesn't starve.
But yeah, 100%.
But at the same time,
that's what your navy should be.
But at the same time, we should also use the navy to support our friends like Australia. And to be fair, an Australian who pointed out that in World War II, Australian troops were some of the first troops to arrive in UK. Same thing in World War I. There's kind of a bit of an O there, as far as I'm concerned. And they are, and I mean, all right, I live in Australia, so but trust me, I'm not biased on that account. I don't really much care what happens to me. And my son would actually be one of the guys probably coming to the rescue. So but I think Britain does owe. We have ties of blood and history with Australia, shall we say?
Yeah, Australia, sure. Taiwan, yeah.
Well, the point is that I support Taiwan not because of Taiwan, but because if China gets away with Taiwan, they'll want to go further, for sure.
Aren't you? I hear your argument on that, but that's the exact argument people are using with Russia about Ukraine.
No, but it's not. It doesn't make any sense with Ukraine. Where is Russia going to go from Ukraine? They're not going to invade Poland. I mean, unless Poland decides to get involved in the Ukraine war, then they might.
You could say the same thing about China. Where's China going
to No, you can't say that because China is an expansionist power. Russia's not expanding. Russia is actually contracting power.
John, I would say the exception between Russia and China is that China is, it is going to become the world superpower, and Russia isn't. China has, I know that GDP is not a big, it's not the best metric on earth, but China's economy grows about 6% every year. Russia's shrunk last year. So,
absolutely correct. And also, the Russian Navy is quite small these days. Really, it's not a big threat to the British.
Okay, but their army isn't.
Well, how are they going to get their army to Britain?
But
it doesn't matter about Britain. China's not going to get their navy to Britain either.
In 10 or 15 years, there's no reason why they couldn't. In the same way that the Americans could.
I don't see.
I do not see China being able to sustain a big offensive. Yeah.
Look, why wouldn't China be able to do what the Americans do today in 10 or 15 or 20 years' time? Why would China not be able to have 3 or 4 carrier task groups off the British coast? The Americans could do that, but the Americans could do that if they wanted to. Why couldn't the Chinese in 10 or 15 years do that? It's only a case of building the supply ships and the expertise, which they are doing.
I think it's incorrect to say that Russia isn't expansionist and Russia couldn't take more than it's currently taking in Ukraine and doesn't and wouldn't if it could, and not to apply the same thing to China.
I don't think that Russia even wants to take all of Ukraine. I think if the Ukrainian
China wants to take Australia.
Well, no, I disagree with that. And there's quite. I'm not going to start it now because we're only going to go another 15 minutes because that will be 3 hours. But on another stream, we will talk about China. We'll do a stream on China if you like. But China has been heavily undermining Australia for a long time now.
I mean, so has Britain. Britain basically forced Australia into China's arms by joining the EU.
I'm not saying that's not true. I never supported us joining the EU. Never did. I was always against. So what I'm trying to say is, yeah, all right. I'm not saying Britain has always done the right thing. Still less would I say America has always done the right thing. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about where we are now in China. Don't forget, Britain had a very good naval agreement with Japan from 1902 to 1922, which we ditched because the Americans got us to ditch it, but didn't give us anything to replace it with.
Oh, welcome to dealing with America 101.
Yeah. I'm no argument from me, mate. You hear me being quite critical of America frequently on this channel. I'm not a supporter of the gay. And people will say, if we fight China, we're fighting for the gay. Well, maybe we are, but I'm afraid that is a bigger deal than the gay at the moment, to me anyway.
What would be the American version of Perfidious Albion?
Limey bastards, probably, but
Yeah. I suppose so.
I mean, they didn't. America was very anti-British in the 19th century. The only people who didn't think it was the upper class English people.
After the First World War, the predicted next World War was between Britain and America.
Yep.
I've said before on my channel that Enoch Powell, when World War II was drawing to a close, he was planning to go to America to sort of scope out potential sites for military, military matters.
Yeah, for sure.
He genuinely thought the next war would be between Britain and America.
Well, in the 1920s, that was extremely realistic, and the Americans had a war plan for fighting Britain, which they kept up to date until 1938. And they were basically going to do what they tried to do in 1812 and take Canada.
Well, they
But you know, this idea that Steve asked Don the Pleb. Don the Pleb's last stream was with two Brits, I would remind you, and I've streamed with Don the Pleb several times. I actually like Don the Pleb. He's a nice bloke.
He's much more likable than AA.
Yes.
And I actually like. I know that I kind of come off sometimes as a bit of a bookish snob, but like I really, really enjoyed his takedown of AA. Basically saying, look, I'm not the biggest fan of intellectualism. I find it very lazy, and you know, it's not helpful. It's not interesting. It's actually something I really like. I'm reading AA's book at the moment because I decided I'd make it my challenge. It's not very good, and it suffers from the same problems I'm talking about here. And like, I really appreciate Don the Pleb basically saying, look, you guys fucking being so snobbish and all that shit, it's just not helpful and it's not likable. And I completely agree with him.
Are you going to do a sort of review or write up on that at any point?
Yeah, I'm thinking about doing something like that.
You should do a stream on it or something, George.
You'll get a huffy, cry reply guy video, I'm sure.
That's the only trouble. You will see. This is the problem with AA. Is if you fall out with AA, you fall out with an awful lot of content creators, some of whom I like.
Also, like when he made like his responses, like, I mean, I remember when people like there was quite a backlash against him doing Carlisle Day, and like, to be honest, I'm quite sympathetic because I hate this idea of like, you know, a lot of the right wing seem to do, in which they basically like find the intellectual, like find the it's like find the next intellectual to suck off. I find it pathetic. I don't, and it's not a very traditional British behavior. I always thought of Britain as a pretty, you know, anti-intellectual country. You know, that's normally seems to be more of a French thing, which is like, oh my goodness, Voltaire. You know, and
detestable person, but
well, they're all detestable. But I remember him being taken down for that sort of Carlisle Day, Evola Day sort of bullshit, and he made videos like he made a response stream basically saying like everyone's making fun of my idea.
This is the guy who came up with the idea of Trumpton. Bear in mind, he did come up with the idea of Trumpton. I mean, look, one of the I don't want to say anything for Don the Pleb because Don the Pleb is perfectly capable of speaking for himself. But I do know that at the beginning, the root of that thing was that Don got counselled from the US of M by someone very close to AA, shall we say.
And that's not something that's ever been sort of reconciled or talked over either.
No one ever said, why did Don get banned? Is Don some sort of savage? No, he's not.
I'm not gonna lie. I thought I didn't think Don's video was particularly great. I got where it came from, and I got that, you know, it was a bit of a drunk stream and a rant with his mates, but this goes back to what I talked about, social media being a bit of a monkey trap.
He was frustrated. He was frustrated and drunk and pissed off, and we all get that way sometimes.
I think Don was very naive to believe that Jay Green River was acting independently of AA.
Yeah, possibly so. Yeah, I mean, I've noticed that he's behind quite a lot of streams. He's behind quite a lot of streams of people who don't acknowledge that usually, but have occasionally. And like on the last AA stream I watched, what's his name? The gay guy, the artist bloke. John D. Yeah, he was going on about Jay Green, but and now something was supposedly a snipe at him because his favourite animal is a quokka, which is something that little girls generally like. But there we go. But you know, I like I said, Don was just drunk. I made a video response to Don because he fucked me off the way he was slagging off the Brits in that stream, and then I spoke to him in private, and he walked that back quite a lot. And then the last stream he did was with two Brits from your channel, John, from your Discord, John. So
okay. No, I'm not. I don't have a problem with Don.
He was drunk and frustrated, and I think it does. The original cause of it does go back to that him being banned from that event for no reason that I can see.
I mean, it's a situation of a typical, tough man's man. He served in the Marine Corps. He's no fucking fluffing guts, and then you get some bitchy side guys who, use some backhanded ways of trying to kick him out. I'd be pissed off too. It's just not 100%. How you're supposed to do stuff.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, 100%. I like Don. I think he's a nice bloke. He's a combat veteran. Like, he's actually been there and done stuff. He's put his life on the line for his country, and I admire that more than I admire an academic who got sacked supposedly because he wasn't politically correct.
I'm not anti-Don. I just think this is something that he could have worked out 2-3 months ago when he got banned from the event.
I don't know how he could. I think he did try, mate. He did try. He did. Don's in my Discord. He's a member of my Discord. And I speak to him fairly regularly. And I've streamed with him 4 times, I think, now. And he did try and sort this out, and he just got nowhere.
Well,
because what happens is people like AA will pretend that somebody like Jay Greenriver is an independent agent when they're not.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Jay Greenriver is not independent. Everything he does is an extension of AA. He's AA's right-hand man, whether people know that or not. He's behind a lot of the community around AA.
Yeah.
He's behind their move to Matrix. If AA tells you, oh no, I didn't agree to that, that's not what I do, but then doesn't do anything about Jay Greenriver, that tells you all you need to know, and Don should have realised that at the time.
Yeah, I think he did, but as George was saying, I think he just got frustrated that he couldn't get anywhere with it.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I would bring up about whether he did or whether he didn't is that I mean, of course, Green River is an extension of AA, and more importantly, I'm thinking to myself, is this the sort of thing AA would do? He's been known to ban guests because they disagreed with him.
Alien kind of character.
Yeah,
and he can be a bit womanish on occasion.
That's the other thing I was about to say. Like, AA strikes me as a pretty effeminate guy. I know that sounds kind of harsh, but
well, I mean,
I agree.
Yeah.
The things I've heard coming out of his Discord would incline me to agree.
I mean, who leaves their wife a note about the kitchen saying he's going to give her £100 fine, for God's sake?
What?
Yeah, honestly.
He wrote up a rule book for kitchen and cleaning glasses and stuff like that.
My goodness, that's what the missus is supposed to do to you.
but instead of putting her across his knee and giving her a spanking, he said, "I'll give you £100 fine, for fuck's sake." I don't know, man. It's like I said, I like Don. I think he's a straight up bloke. I will point out that in Don, even when he was pissed out of his brain, Don went out of his way to say that Dave the Distributorist was the one bloke who stood up and defended him publicly, which he did. And I like Dave the Distributorist. He's one of the only 2 channels on YouTube that I'm a moderator on. So I think Don's a pretty straight up dude. I don't always agree with his views, and he's a very patriotic American. And I think that's where the anti-British stuff came from, because he's got a lot of AA's little coterie of people sniping at him, and some of them are more or less Brits.
Just all of it was just ridiculous drama, and that's exactly what feeds AA. Drama is like oxygen to AA's fire.
Yeah. I listen. It was ill judged on Don's part. It was ill judged, but as people have been saying in the chat, who hasn't got drunk and cursed different people at different times? I've certainly done that. I mean, I've got a couple of streams that I privated because I was a bit, you can do it, and I don't think less of Don for it. What I have been disappointed with is people like Charlemagne, who walked around Washington with Don on January 6th.
I don't know why.
Again, it's never said a word in support of Don that I've heard.
I think you've fallen into the same trap as Don did.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, look, I expect mates to be mates, you know, and to be upfront
They're
and
not.
loyal.
They're not mates. They're academics. They're scholars. I'm literally a scholar.
Well, I don't know what Charlemagne is, to be honest. He's a computer
programmer.
he's a computer.
He's a computer guppy like me.
Yeah, but I mean, I think you're a real bloke, George. You know what I mean? I don't think that you. I mean, apart from the fact that one thing public school probably does is teach you about mateship a bit when you're younger. You know.
Yeah.
You've got to remember that a lot of them orbit AA because he represents their chance at kind of
internet fame,
and Don doesn't. I'm sorry, Don doesn't have a big channel compared. I mean, AA's channel isn't big, but compared to Don's, it's Yeah,
I mean, and as I said, the one thing that puts me off really, I mean, I often disagree with AA, and I'll say so in his own chat. But the thing that puts me off really falling out with him is if I did, I know damn well I'd fall out with a lot of people who I like, who are part of his kind of orbit, which I don't think is very healthy, to be honest. Like I said, I like Don, but I don't want to fall out with some of the people who appear on AA shows. There are other people who appear on AA shows who I detest and despise.
You know, I said this to Harry the other day. I think it's interesting that one of the things AA likes to go on about of late is the JQ. And I find it interesting that one of the lines that always comes up is, they've been banned. If someone's banned from 109 countries, then it's usually them that's the problem, not the country. And it's a bit the same with AA. If you've fallen out with 109 people, isn't it starting to be you that's the problem?
Yeah, like I said, I wouldn't care if AA never spoke to me or anything. I've got no desire to appear on an AA stream or anything of that nature.
I just think he's
but there are people who do appear on AA streams who I like, and who I think are sane and good people. But unfortunately, AA seems to run this kind of very womanly idea that if you fall out with him, you have to fall out with everybody else. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, no, I don't disagree.
I mean, I could like fall out with people on your Discord, John, or your Discord, George, and it wouldn't mean I would fall out with you yourself. You know, because your views are not theirs. People are allowed to have their own views. There's nobody I 100% agree with. Like Ataman and I have been doing these streams for like nearly 2 years, but I don't totally agree with Ataman by any means, and I know he doesn't totally agree with me.
Yeah, I mean,
but that's a manly way of doing stuff, and the womanly way is, you fall out with everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I can't disagree.
It's a very strange way for a man to carry on. To me,
I think his sole purpose now is to defang a lot of the right, just as long as they're sat there listening to his streams rather than doing anything worthwhile with their lives.
I mean, I said this on actually one of Ralph's streams. You don't think of him as a political thinker, and don't think of him as someone trying to make progress. He's an entertainer.
Yes.
He stands. He does these streams 3 times a week. He asks for super chats. He makes a lot of money doing that way. He does his courses, which are of mixed. They are. I certainly wouldn't recommend.
I've heard a number of them are basically just Wikipedias.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend them to people who are actually interested in these subjects. There's plenty of other resources that you can go to get these.
You can just go and read the books yourself. I mean, go on. What's that public library website, George? You'll probably know. I can't remember the name of it now. I've got it bookmarked.
Library Genesis, I hope.
Yeah. There's loads of them. There's several. There's 2 or 3 where you can find loads of books absolutely free.
Yeah.
So if you want to read this stuff, go and read it.
And MIT has an introduction to economics course. It's actually pretty accessible. There is history, there's history lectures untold of on YouTube.
Yes,
You do
there
not
are.
need to pay 350 quid to learn how to write and how to hold your knife and fork. You're fine, I promise.
There's also I was just going to say there's also the Mises Institute has loads of free economic stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I question the utility of their economics courses, but that's because I'm not saying this because I spent an ungodly amount of money getting an economics degree. I'm actually saying this because I kind of disagree with a lot of Austrian economics.
Really?
But there's better things like there.
They've always made the most sense to me. Certainly, much more sense than Keynesian stuff.
That's that's the problem. The problem with Keynesians is things get very, very technical very quickly in economics, and that I suppose that's the benefit of Austrian economics. Like if I was to teach a sort of like economics in 10 minutes, I would use Austrian economics. But like a bit more involved, I'd probably teach neoclassical economics. But either way, and all that aside,
Austrian economics makes a lot of sense because it essentially says that the micro can be applied to the macro. But from what I understand, Keynesianism is very much, and monetarism sort of suffers along the same lines. Is that you can't
modern monetary theory is just completely insane to me.
You can't get to the macro from the micro, and therefore it makes no sense because the macro should just be the aggregation of the micro, which is what Austrian economics says.
Yeah, so you would be right about old Keynesian economics, but there's basically the modern macroeconomic consensus is called New Keynesian theory, in which everything is micro-founded, and you start off with there's a lot. I mean,
but equally, aren't these the same people advocating for MMT? And the like.
No, those are slightly different. MMT is slightly different to the Keynesian, but I could get very, very technical about this because the problem is.
Let's not get technical because this will turn off our
exactly.
viewers. But what I would just ask you, George, like I am pretty convinced that we're going to see 20% inflation within the year.
My guess is something like 8 or 9%. I don't know. There is a model I could try and use to predict it, but like
inflation is notoriously difficult to really pin down.
Yeah. And also it's underreported. It's underreported by Western governments.
None of them tends to take into account everything.
What I will say is that what I was going to say is that the main stride I was making is that there is loads of economics courses. You can get a bachelor's in economics without ever having to open a book because of the stuff on YouTube. You do not need to pay AA 500 quid or whatever it is, whatever ungodly amount it is, for something that no employer is even going to sniff at. Like, come on, have some self-respect.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy one of AA's courses. I mean, for one thing, who's going to recognise it if you did?
Yeah. If you're doing it for self-interest, like if you don't, then
look, I can see there would be people who would not be focused enough to independently research some of this stuff. For people like that, it's probably useful. If you got 350 quid with nothing better to spend it on.
Yeah, I mean, if you need some extra CV padding, and and like you can have it under your certification section, maybe. Like,
what would happen is that your potential employer Googles what it is and finds out he's a chap that's been kicked out of his university for being a rapist.
That is definitely a risk you're running.
Yeah, I don't know. Again, we've drifted off our subject a bit, but I just think I agree with George. AA is an entertainer first and foremost. What I did want to bring us back to is because he does so much dog whistling these days. I'm never sure if that is AA's own views or if it is AA pandering to a proportion of his audience. I don't know what you guys think about that.
I mean, that was always going to be the case when he went full-time YouTube. You end up stuck in this position where you have to pander to your audience, because people, especially on a platform like YouTube, they can be quite fickle. They can just switch off or go somewhere else to hear what it is they want to hear.
Yeah, I don't, pretty much.
I'd be the first to say that I don't think it was right that he lost his job for what he did necessarily.
No, of course not. Absolutely. I think we'd all agree with that. I mean, it's ridiculous. PC stuff in general is ridiculous. But do we think this is AA's real views, or do we think that he's pandering, or is it a mixture of the two?
Probably a mixture of the two, to be honest.
Because I remember probably 4 or 5 years ago, when I first saw AA on YouTube, and he was very much a liberal, libertarian liberal, I'd say, and he was streaming with that twat, the Britisher, who I can't stand to this day.
Yes, his accent's worse than mine.
Well, yeah, his accent's not natural at all, but
yes, I do like quite. He does that really annoying sort of like annoying plasticness to it.
Yeah, yes, it's not something that he just learned while he was at school. But yeah, I don't. But that's not why I don't like him. I don't like him because of his views.
Oh
like,
yeah,
he'd be cut in half by fences all for his life, I think. But he's always on the fence about everything, basically. But AA used to be very much a social liberal, as far as I was concerned. In fact, I stopped watching him because he was so social liberal. And he was a lolbertarian, as people call them these days. And I just stopped watching him. And then I had a few people say to me, "Oh, this was probably 3 years ago, maybe." People started saying to me, "Oh no, AA's gone way to the right," and this was just before he kicked the Britisher off his channel. Which, of course, is another thing that I would point out AA did. He did streams with this bloke for bloody years and then just kicked him off. So even if you don't like, if you didn't like him, why did you stream with him all that time anyway? But he's making a living from YouTube. So as some of you have said, and I think that's the main thing you have to realize about it. He's making a bloody good living from YouTube as well. He makes a lot of money in super chats.
My thoughts on that is that basically, I think he basically started moving right around the time what was called the quote skeptic community, which is just one of the worst, most disgusting monikers I can possibly imagine.
Yeah. I remember that. I remember the skeptic community. Yes.
And basically,
Sargon at the head of it. And by the way, has anyone noticed the one liberal who AA is always very careful not to fall out with is, of course, Sargon.
But actually, Sargon's interestingly has had quite a divergence recently, a bit like AA. But I think it's for slightly more honest reasons. But what I was going to say was that, when that community fell apart, you sort of had this, I think basically things split left and rightward. You have BreadTube now, which is, of course, I think that's the main political YouTube these days, because
lefty arseholes, yes.
Yeah, because that's what people allow. You get Vorsh and that dude who's
the pedophile guy.
That's
ContraPoints, the bloke pretending to be a woman. Yeah, I'm surprised ContraPoints is not on AA's show because he likes those sort of people.
Yeah, and then you've got a small. I think AA basically decided to exploit the right wing shift. A bit of a medium voter theorem for YouTube politics.
Yeah, but
God help me.
AA is one of these people who goes on about what is it when people show what they believe by what they do? What's it called?
Reveal preference.
Reveal preferences. Yeah. Now he talks about reveal preferences all the time, but he voted for Blair. He voted Remain rather than.
He voted for the Lib Dems as well after Blair.
Yeah, he voted for the Lib Dems. He told people to vote for Alexander Johnson at the last election. He was absolutely on board with the Trump train until nobody else was.
He talks about collective thinking all the time, but you have to remember,
And he also goes on about. Sorry, George. Just let me finish this because I'll forget otherwise. He also goes on all the time about things like the animated trans pipeline, but has trans people on his show all the time.
I mean, what I was going to bring up is that he whines about, like, we don't think as a collective enough, blah 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 blah, and then he votes Remain because of his own bloody house prices. I mean, seriously, can you make a better joke?
Revealed preferences, as AA is fond of talking about. If you look at his revealed preferences,
that always struck me as funny because he claims to be someone who believes that foreigners shouldn't be able to buy property in the UK. And he was literally a half Iranian owning 2 houses, voting Remain so he could get a better price on one of them.
Yeah,
he has
absolutely.
2 houses, doesn't he? Yeah.
He's got AA Lodge, which is somewhere in the country.
He had 2 houses at the time of the Brexit referendum. That's why he voted Remain, because he was trying to sell one of them.
Yeah.
He's
quite a rich chap, I think.
He is literally the thing he claims we should hate.
I mean, I often disavow the whole grifter phrase on the right, because I think if you're going to grift, you'd just be a leftist. But he talks a lot of critiques about so-called gatekeepers for someone who does nothing but gatekeep people out of sort of his little portion of the right.
I said earlier, I think he's containment.
That's crazy. Throws around a lot as well.
Well, I mean, look at the so-called Tory boys that he uses all the time, and I've streamed with. Yeah, I mean, but I've streamed with you for a long time, John, and I've also streamed fairly frequently with Royal Oak, and I know for a fact that neither you nor Royal Oak are big supporters of Alexander Johnson. So
I think Oki got rid of his membership, and I mean, I was in a similar situation. I mean, a year ago, I had a membership. And,
I've got a membership now.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make you a supporter of Alexander Johnson.
No.
Well, I mean, his distinction of Tory boy isn't member of the party, though, is it? It's actually the opposite.
Well, it's someone who he doesn't like, so far as I'm
well, that is the actual criteria.
I mean, there was that thing about like the boom of truth regime, which is like things like saying that Nazi Germany was a bad regime. Spoiler alert, it was.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan, I've got to say. I mean, I detest Stalin and the Soviets, but
I'm not going to lie.
Hitler was better.
I was always against the book burning, but once I learned what books they were burning, I kind of became for it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely correct. That was one way I big time did change. I didn't realise that the books they were burning were actually depraved bollocks, So,
well, they were burning stuff like All Quiet on the Western Front and stuff as well, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean they got that. They got that banned.
Breaking a few eggs.
They actually the Nazis got that banned in Germany. The film version that came out in the 1930s. They actually got that banned by letting off stink bombs and all the SA, the brown shirts guys would go into cinemas and let off stink bombs, and they said it was insulting to the German World War I soldiers, which I don't think it is actually, but there we go.
No, it's a film about the tragedy of war. It's not insulting at all.
I mean, look, to me, to get a better idea of what the Nazis were really, you got to look at somebody like the bloke who wrote Storm of Steel, Ernst Junger. I think it's Ernst Junger, isn't it? He was not a big fan of the Nazis and Hitler at all.
Part of the reason the Nazis were fairly successful is because most of them were war veterans.
Yeah. One reason
of some renown.
Goering was a World War I fighter ace who at one stage commanded Richtofen Squadron.
I mean, if you wanted a runner in World War One, Hitler was a good bet, right?
Yeah, he won the Iron Cross twice. One of which was actually given to him by a German Jewish officer, would you believe? But there you go. But that's true. I checked that; it was actually true.
And this is why people were quite willing to follow them, because they represented an element of people who were willing to put their lives on the line for their country, which you can't say the same of modern politicians. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean the other thing is that, I mean, look, they were come home. But they obviously had, they cared. They definitely cared about unemployment, because not only did they say we're going to get rid of it, but when they came into charge, they actually did their utmost to try and stop it. Did they succeed?
And to some degree they did. To some degree they did. Partly through rearmament, it has to be said.
Partly through, and a lot of it was uneconomic. Like you can basically play with the numbers, and there's certain people that weren't Aryan no longer, they no longer were on the unemployment register and things.
But there was also, George, there was also quite a lot of similarities with some of the stuff the Nazis did with what FDR did with his New Deal in America.
Yeah. No, I mean it was classical Keynesian economics, what the Nazis did. This is where I disagree with Tick about the idea that it was, quote, socialism, because I associate socialism with something a bit more.
I think it was part of
national socialism.
Yeah, it was national socialism, and if you look at, and also there is a difference between the German Nazis and the Italian fascists. They're not the same, and if you look at fascism and German National Socialism, there are certainly socialist left-wing elements in it for sure.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing I was going to say is that it's left-wing economics. Yes, it's not. I wouldn't call it state socialism exactly, but anyway, the point I was going to say is that they obviously had a care and concern for some people, a lot of people in Germany, not all of people, and they weren't particularly gracious in a lot of ways. And, people can't protest the state, and Hitler was planning to get rid of the Bible and all that sort of stuff. But they're not also, there was a reason why they won. Was the way of saying it.
I mean, look, you've got to look at the hyperinflation that Germany went through in the 1920s. And then they got out of that, and then the Great Depression came along, and they suffered like everyone else did. So they've been coming off a very bloody bad time.
Okay.
I think it's not true that the Versailles Treaty was like absolutely vile, as some people will tell you. It wasn't very fair, but I don't think it was any worse than the sort of treaty Germany would have done if they'd have won.
Oh, the Germans would have been worse. They would have totally been worse.
They would have been at least as bad anyway.
I think Jordan Peterson, one of the things I think he's absolutely correct to say is that, basically, if you've been born in Germany at that period, chances are you'd have been maybe not a Nazi, but at least positively disposed towards them.
Well, this is the thing with Ernst Jünger, right? Because Duke, you said that Ernst Jünger wasn't a fan. The thing is, there was a lot of people like Ernst Jünger. It wasn't that they didn't like the Nazis. It was that they were disappointed because they wanted something that was more traditionally conservative.
Yes.
And went back to like the German Empire, and what the National Socialists were doing were trying to build something wholly very new and very different.
They were futurists.
Adam and I agree with you totally. You make a very good point, and I would say the tragedy for Germany actually is that the royalists didn't manage to bring back the German royal family instead.
Yeah.
I think that's the tragedy for Germany and Europe and probably the world in some degree.
I mean,
I've also now become convinced that had Britain and France not declared war on Germany over Poland, I don't think Germany had any intention. Hitler had no intention, as far as I now believe, to attack France or Britain.
He had no intention of going west. I mean,
no, he didn't.
There are certain things I believe he was planning to do which pretty egregious.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm not saying he's a nice guy, but I don't think he was going to attack France or Belgium or Britain.
Yeah, and it's for that reason which I'm still kind of undecided about whether we should have gone to war with them, because I'm not entirely sure. I'm not entirely sure I could be okay with someone killing 120 million people or something thereof on my doorstep.
Your reasoning is post hoc.
Yeah, sure.
Your reasoning
I know it is.
After the event.
Yeah, I'm not making a decision for the people of the time. I'm just saying that, from my perspective now.
All right, even taking your view, George, which I can see, I don't think I would agree with that, because, for me, I care about Britain first, second, and always.
Sure.
But I think even taking your view, the Royal Navy, for example, was planned to be at full strength by 1942, right? And there's no way, if Britain was not fighting Germany and if France was still an independent nation, that Japan would have started World War II in December 1941. Wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
And the Royal Navy, as I said, was set up to be at full strength by 1942. Pretty much the same applied to the RAF and the British Army. And we then would still have had a working economy. All of our armed forces would have been vastly stronger and larger and better trained. And we could then have made a sensible decision rather than starting a war when we were only half ready.
Yeah,
and becoming bankrupt within 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a reasonable argument. I'm not, of course, I'm not saying that like we should throw British lives away at any humanitarian cause just cause. No, it's more. I don't know. It's just when I see something that indecent on such a scale that I
do see what you're saying, but like to me, I honestly would have let the last Red Guardsman fight the last SS Panzer Grenadier somewhere up around Archangel, and I wouldn't have cared. Have cared at all.
If you can get the rush, this is actually something that I do applaud Churchill for a bit. Anyways, that he's basically figured out if you can get the Russians to do something for you,
well,
they can do that.
Part of the problem is that you ended up with Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was entirely due to people like Churchill snubbing Russia.
Yes, thank you, John. Very 100% true. Yeah,
I'm not quite of the same vein as Iron Duke in that I do like Winston Churchill. I don't. To be clear, I don't think he's all bad, and I think there's some things he should probably be remembered relatively well for, but. The pre-war interlude is not one of those things.
I will also say Dawn Browning in the chat is saying Horace is interesting on the subject. Well, funny you should say that, Dawn Browning, because I'm actually in touch with Horace and we're going to be doing a stream, hopefully sooner rather than later, looking at the Britain in the 1920s and 30s and the Washington Naval Treaty and Winston Churchill, and I'm not as anti-Churchill as Horace is, but I think Churchill was a vile strategist in terms of the Navy and the Army, and made many mistakes.
I think Obama-Kang's raises an interesting point there, in that in 1939 there was no particular evidence of significant atrocities.
Absolutely not. No, there wasn't. And can I just point something out? There's a very good book called Bloodlands. I can't remember who wrote it, but it's basically about
Timothy
Poland.
Snyder. I've got it on my bookshelf right here.
Thank you. I've read it, and it's basically about Ukraine and Poland and that kind of area.
Europe between Hitler and Stalin.
And he points out in that book that up until 1940. Hitler was an absolute small-scale amateur in terms of mass murder compared to Stalin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'm absolutely I'm definitely in agreement on this, and there's a reason why I'm saying, for example, that I don't think we should have attacked Russia, and that's because I'm not entirely sure we could beat Russia. We could probably have beaten Germany, but and of course the other thing is that yes, of course, this is an entirely retrospective view. It's the same thing for my ancestor Henry Dundas. He delayed the slave trade bill so that the Whigs would win and we could abolish the slave trade. But if
was he a naval guy, George?
He also was First Lord of the Admiralty for a bit.
Yeah,
and he
I thought so. Yeah. Good one. He was a good one too.
Yeah, and he also ran some of the India campaigns for a bit. But the SNP.
Blimey, I know this chap. That's a damn good ancestor to have, man.
First Viscount of Melville, stand-up guy. But the SNP are planning to put up a plaque of him, saying how mean and evil he was. And so I'm making the retrospective judgment here, as many people are saying, well, he shouldn't have delayed the slave trade bill. Of course, in my perspective, he should have delayed it because he won. But another perspective of mine is that, Britain, maybe it was the right decision to go to war because I don't want lots of people dying. And it's that's a retrospective point of view, and I understand the weaknesses.
Maybe more people died.
Maybe
more people died because Britain did go to war than might have done if we hadn't have gone to war. We don't know.
That's possible. That is possible, and
I
that's the
think
problem with these questions.
There's some interesting parallels, because up until that point in 1939, what Hitler had pursued was the kind of I can't remember the word that's used, but in it was kind of like this medical nationalism, in the sense that a lot of what they were doing at that point was meddling in the lives of undesirables, people considered unworthy of life, and they tended to be people that were sick or disabled, and I'm not justifying that, but what I'm trying to get to is what we saw in Britain recently, very recently, in the COVID pandemic, which was that our medical professionals made the decision that said that the elderly people's lives are not worthy of being in hospital, and we will send them to go and die in care homes and to infect everyone in the care home, because that was more convenient than dealing with them in the hospitals. And that, for me, and I remember reading, I read The Nazi Doctors, which is by Robert J. Lifton, and it talks about the medical and the psychology
and Nazi nurses as well. Yes, absolutely.
And he's a Jew, and he talked to a lot of the people immediately after the war, a lot of these doctors and nurses and so on that were involved in, right from the very beginning in the hospitals, right through to being involved in the camps and so on. And some of it I think is a bit far-fetched, and I don't necessarily wholly accept as being reality, but maybe that's part of me. I just can't comprehend that as being reality. But some of it, when I was reading it at the time we were in lockdown, and this stuff was going on with the care homes, and I was just thinking, man, there are so many parallels here.
Two things. I mean, first of all, I want to just say to 555 in the chat, Britain should still be in Singapore, if you ask me. Well, the British recently reopened their naval base in Singapore, so we are. And the second thing is, he says Churchill started his bad runoff at Gallipoli. No, he didn't, mate. He started his bad runoff in 1914 when he got a lot of British sailors killed by getting weak Royal Navy forces to attack much stronger German forces. Battle of Coronel, for example, where two old British cruisers with reservist crews who'd only been aboard those ships for a few months had to take on some of the crack units of the German High Seas Fleet under von Spee, I think it was. It was Admiral von Spee, and got slaughtered because they were very brave, but their ships just weren't powerful enough to take on those German ships. And that was Churchill, and that's when he started. Because he was trying to day-to-day as the guy in charge of the Royal Navy politically, he was trying to micromanage what the Royal Navy did, and he knew nothing about naval tactics. Never did his whole life. He was always useless at them, and he was always pretty useless at army tactics, to be honest with you. If you read the Allenbrook diaries, Allenbrook was the chief of the Imperial General Staff in World War II. He spent most of World War II arguing Churchill out most of his more ridiculous ideas, usually at 3 o'clock in the morning when Churchill was drunk.
Was Dieppe a bit of a Churchill thing? Or am I?
Partly, although the guy I would really blame for that, who is another bloke who gets far too good a reputation, was the guy who the Pyro guys murdered in Ireland, who Prince Charles liked so much. Mambam, who got cut, who got
the empire, basically.
Yeah, the guy who acted as the Labour Party's front man for giving up India while his wife was being fucked by Nero. Yeah, great bloke, Mambam. Really good.
Anyway, I'm going to leave you guys to it and head off.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thanks. We've gone pretty late today. We're going to wrap it up pretty soon now, I think.
Right.
But no, thanks for coming on, Adam, and you're always welcome, mate. I don't know, man. I just think all of that stuff. Now, what you guys were saying about the coup, which I think now everyone pretty much realizes was a bad flu at worst, really, to be honest. To just a vast overreaction, but I think it was done on purpose. And like all of those powers which the governments took, they're never not going to be able to use them now.
Yeah,
that is the really bad thing. And the other thing that occurred to me while you were talking, John, I mean, look, I certainly didn't agree with the Nazi idea of killing mentally handicapped people at all. Don't agree with that. Absolutely don't agree with that. But we live in a society. How many abortions are there in Britain every year this year?
Oh, I think we're at the point where it's something like a quarter or a fifth of all potential births are terminated.
So how many? That would be like hundreds of thousands, I take it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so, do we really have reason? I mean, all right, you can argue, I suppose, that killing a fetus is a baby in the womb is not the same as killing an actual.
You're talking 200,000 plus abortions per year.
So can we really talk about the Nazis killed, I don't know, a few thousand mentally handicapped people?
I think that's pretty fallacious reasoning. Like, I can be opposed to both.
No, absolutely. I'm not saying they are equivalent. Like I said, let me make this very clear. I do not agree with killing mentally handicapped people at all. I just wouldn't do it. It's a crime. But I equally don't agree with abortion, and I certainly don't agree with abortion after the first, 6 weeks or so.
Yeah. No, I know. Yeah, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. That, and
this has been my argument for a long time, which is that we took the Nazi conception of life unworthy of life, which was actually an American conception.
Yeah.
That was exported, surprise, surprise, to other countries, and the Nazis took it and ran with it. We've changed their policy of dealing with external problems and moved it to inside the womb where no one can complain about it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not a Roman Catholic. If I was to be a Christian, I'd be Church of England. But I'm actually an agnostic. But I do believe that if you're killing unborn babies, you're killing them. You are.
Yes.
And I've known 2 women who've had abortions. So And I've also known, but not in the biblical sense, a woman who had so many abortions that when in her late 30s she finally decided she wanted to have kids, she couldn't because she miscarried every time.
I would find it would colour my judgment of a person to the extent that I would find it very hard to associate with them unless they had what, in my mind, was a very good reason. Yeah,
no, I don't disagree with you at all, mate. I really don't. But yeah, we're very hypocritical in the West, and you get this women's "my body, my choice," but that baby is not her
it's
body.
Not the woman's body that's aborted.
No, exactly not.
The idea that anyone in any country has 100% integrity over their body is a complete lie. The government, first of all, the government can send me in prison for any reason these days. But more importantly,
or no reason.
More importantly, I can get the draft letter tomorrow that says you're going to war, and I don't really have a choice. I mean, I'd probably accept it anyway, as long as the war is, to my mind, there's a good reason for that war, which is more often than not, if it's the draft, it means the country's in danger of, and I'll do it. But as opposed to fighting Ukraine or something like that, I'd probably kick up a fuss about that. But
so would I.
Yeah, but no one in the West has ever had 100% integrity of their bodies. No one anywhere on Earth has ever had that right, because there are sometimes things that you owe your family. You owe your body to your family. You owe your body to your community. You owe your body to.
If we exclude the absolutely tiny minority of women that end up pregnant due to rape, and we can have that as a separate discussion.
Yep, fair enough.
If you exclude that tiny minority, every single woman that got pregnant and chose to have an abortion was in full control of their bodies at the point they got pregnant. Yep. Why couldn't they be in full control of their bodies then?
And it's not like there are no methods of birth control these days, is it?
No.
And do we really have to? Are we really okay with having people in the adult population not understanding the idea of actions have fucking consequences?
I just checked to confirm it is 1/4 of all potential human beings in the UK are ended by abortion at present.
Jesus.
And what's the last date you can get a legal abortion in UK now, John?
Is it 20-something weeks?
It's way too late. I mean, like if I was going to allow abortion, it would be maybe up to 8 weeks.
24 weeks.
Yeah, I see that. To me, that's 3 times too long at least.
It's a second trimester.
They can be carried out after 24 weeks if the mother's life is at risk, which is one time I will accept.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I'd go along with that. Yeah.
But also if the baby is likely to be severely disabled, which includes Down syndrome.
I don't know about that. Maybe. I might support that, but the reason it's an issue. But the reason that's an issue is women are having babies so late, and you're much more likely to have a Down syndrome baby if you're in your late 30s. That's the reason it's an issue. So if women weren't having babies that late, this would not be a problem.
One of the things that also used to cause a lot of birth defects is the fact that women used to have baby after baby after baby, and it didn't give their bodies enough time to recover all the necessary nutrients and vitamins, minerals.
Certainly does not happen today.
It doesn't happen today because most women will have 2 children
at most.
At most, and so there is no. They don't lack the ability to regain all those lost nutrients, and therefore the likelihood of them having deformed children or birth defects, unless there's like a genetic.
The main reason for it today is because women have babies far too late.
I don't know. I really struggle with this idea that we can make judgments on people's lives based on a genetic disease. It's a really tricky road for me. That
George, the point I was making was that if women were to have babies when they should be having them, which is in their 20s and their early 30s and not their late 30s, this would be a self-solving issue because wouldn't have.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Again, as in the case with rape, we're talking about an absolutely tiny minority. I would be. I think Ben Shapiro basically said this to someone who was heckling him at a event, speech thing, Q&A. He said, "Okay, I'll let you have rape cases. I'll let you have cases where the mother's life's at risk. I'll let you have cases where the child is going to be deformed, basically not going to have any kind of life. You're still talking like 98, 99% of abortions would be gone overnight."
Yeah, and I mean, look, even if you're going to have abortion, and I accept that absolutely just getting rid of it is probably impossible in most Western societies now. But if you're going to have it, it should be limited to 8 weeks. If it's beyond 8 weeks, then that baby is becoming an actual person. Now, if you're religious, you'll say that baby is a person like straight away, almost. Fair enough. But
I disagree with you there. There are religion. I mean, in the Bible, there is the time of the quickening, which is not particularly specific, but it kind of argues that it's not 100% settled that a spirit enters the body from the moment a sperm enters the egg. So
I wouldn't pretend to know, John. To be honest, I'm not religious enough to know that. I just feel that if you're going to have abortion at all, it should be limited to about 8 weeks when the baby is not anything like a fully formed human being yet. Yeah. And I mean, in America, the push seems to be these days that they want to go on to, they want to push for abortion up to birth. And I've heard people talking about abortion post-birth, which to me is just straight up child murder. But, there we go.
Yeah.
We live in a very Sick society. Nemo in the chat, I'm sorry, mate, but this is bullshit. Most humans are deformed. Anyone that has anger and hatred is spiritually deformed.
He said this before.
Yeah, it's bollocks. Anger and hatred are natural human emotions. Sorry.
He would argue that you're deformed.
Well, in that case, every single human has always been deformed and always will be then.
Tell me, Nemo. So someone so you get a call from your dad, and he says, "Oh, by the way, your mother's been raped." What is the normal human supposed to feel?
Yeah.
Tell me what the normal human is supposed to feel in that situation. I think I'd be pretty pissed off, personally. I think I might actually want to go kill someone.
Yeah, or some filth assaults your child.
Yeah, I think I would. Yeah, like
cut the fucking head off.
Like,
sorry, doesn't make me deformed. It makes me a real human.
I know maybe it does, but if that, but that makes everyone deformed, and then like if that's the case, then like. I mean, if you want to go down the really sort of stupid route in which you can basically say everyone's deformed because not everyone is, no one is a 200 IQ, gorgeous, sublime, beauty, blah blah blah.
Speak for yourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, but like, I mean, I think that's a pretty terrible criteria. Because if something can apply to everyone, then it's not a very useful word.
He's just being like a zealot. Like I wouldn't pay him any attention, to be honest. Like reading his replies, it's just standard.
No, I'm just seeing the.
If you don't, I can't remember what cult it was, but I remember my medieval history teacher talking to me about the kind of Reformation Europe, and there was a particular cult that would go around challenging people to eat rocks, and if they had enough faith they'd turn into bread, and of course no one's going to be able to turn rocks into bread because it doesn't matter how much faith you've got. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you get those snake handlers in America which like found like a Bible verse which says if you have enough faith you can handle snakes.
With the
so they all start playing around with black mambas and like they all die.
No, they're not black mambas, they're rattlesnakes. Black mambas are far too dangerous to do that with, mate. And they're South African as well. But yeah, black mambas are very nasty things in terms of like, they're really quick and they can get like 9-10 foot long and absolutely deadly. If you haven't got the anti-venom within about half an hour, you're a goner, mate. Rattlesnakes, despite their reputation, are not as dangerous as that. Black mambas, I think, are the thing with a black mamba is they inject you with so much venom, like they inject you with enough to kill about 3 elephants. It's really crazy. They're very, very dangerous snakes.
Yeah.
Right, gents, we've been going much longer than I normally go these days. It's been an interesting conversation. Anything you two chaps would like to shill before we knock it off?
Yeah, I'll drop my Discord in the chat.
All right, mate, and put it in the Discord. Put it in my
invite. The invite I sent you from the DMs is still working, so that should.
Oh, cool.
Be fine.
All right, so I can use that again, can I?
Yeah.
All right, I'll use that one, mate. Anything you want to shill, John? Like the Wellington project, etc.
No, I saw you posted the link to John's article already. That's great, thank you.
All right, well, if you put the Wellington project link and DM it to me, I'll put that in the description so people can join.
Okay. Sure.
So we'll do those things. All right, guys. As I said, we'll see you next week for Splendid Isolation number 70, for God's sake. I am going to be doing a stream, hopefully sooner rather than later, with Horace about Britain in the 1930s. And as we slightly got into on this stream, I have become utterly convinced that if Britain and France had not declared war on Germany over Poland, which was a huge error, I don't think Hitler had any intention of coming west at all. But that's something I've become more and more convinced of the more I've read over the last couple of years, I guess. As always, I'm going to play us out with a tune.
Here we go.
Okay, that was the Garb of Old Gaul, which is a British military tune. I think it's actually really a Scottish military tune. And the illustrations from that were for George Napier's extraordinary Abyssinian expedition into what is these days Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian emperor had taken some British diplomats and missionaries hostage. So the Brits launched this extraordinary expedition into the mountains of Ethiopia, Abyssinia as it was known in those days, and rescued them all. It's a really extraordinary military operation in 1868, if I remember correctly. All right, guys, I would ask you to make sure, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and you won't miss any future content. Thank you very much to my guests this evening, and we'll see you next time. Go well.